Chapter 1753. Escort envoy. You're saying that Feng Ruji perished because of Zhuowen? He laughed with ridicule. Dong Qixin shook his head as well. He didn't think that Zhuowen possessed the ability to kill an advanced stage earthly immortal realm expert because it was truly unrealistic. Because according to the rumors, Zhuowen was merely at the Yang Sky Saint realm at that time. What could such a lowly cultivation do? If it wasn't for the fact that Zhuowen possessed the quintessence of both the Icefire Saint Talisman and Tempest Saint Talisman and caused a war between the Icefire clan and Tempest clan, then it would really be impossible for Zhuowen to possess such a high reputation in the Central Plains with his cultivation. Yang Yi intended to continue speaking, but Zhuowen sent a voice transmission to Yang Yi and stopped him from continuing. He was very clearly aware that he had to display sufficient strength to obtain the acknowledgement of others, and he really didn't need to rely on false reputation to obtain the acknowledgement of others. Since you don't believe me, then forget it. Yang Yi couldn't be bothered to speak any further. He grinned instead, and his gaze imperceptibly glanced towards Zhuowen's direction and said, based on what you said, Zhuowen should be here as well. A legendary fellow who was able to cause a war between the Icefire clan and Tempest clan and possesses the quintessence of both the Icefire Saint Talisman and Tempest Saint Talisman is going to continue hiding like a tortoise and not show himself to others? A tortoise hiding in its shell is much better than a despicable villain who bullies the weak. At this moment, a clear and melodious voice resounded, and it caused Hiyu's eyes to narrow. He stared indifferently at Zhuowen and said, "Since you've answered, then it looks like you're that Zhuowen, right? Your cultivation has improved rather quickly, but you're still just an ant in my eyes. Whether I'm an ant or not isn't something that can be determined with word." Zhuowen spoke indifferently. Hiyu laughed instead and said, "You're right. Once the war begins, I'll let you know exactly how lowly a mere half-immortal like you is." Swoosh. Just as Hiyu finished speaking, the eastern array formation around the fragment suddenly lit up with a beam of light. Then, numerous figures flashed out, densely packed like locusts. The leader of the group was an old man with a thin face. Beside the old man was a man in a similar attire as Yang Yi. This man should be the envoy of chaos in charge of this teleportation portal. After the old man appeared, he silently followed behind the envoy of primal chaos with a gloomy expression. The 100 people from the Icefire clan's region have been chosen. After Hiyu and Dong Qixin looked at the old man indifferently, they only casually exchanged a few words, but did not have any intention of greeting the old man. Zhuowen stared at the thin old man while his gaze revealed a wisp of coldness. He was naturally not unfamiliar with this old man. He was the second earthly immortal realm expert in the Icefire clan besides Jiang Xuame, and he was the Grand Elder of the Icefire clan, Jiangzhe. Perhaps because he felt Zhuowen's cold gaze, Jiangzhe casually glanced at Zhuowen. Then, his body suddenly trembled, and his eyes suddenly turned red. "It's you, Zhuowen?" Jiangzhe roared furiously. He actually completely disregarded his bearing and directly flashed towards Zhuowen's group like a bolt of lightning. Even the envoy of chaos in front of his group could not react in time. Zhuowen stood silently on the spot. He stared at Jiangzhe, who had fallen into a violent rage and sneered in his heart. The moment Jiangzhe approached, Yang Yi snorted coldly and grabbed at the air with his right hand. Instantly, the space around Jiangzhe froze. Jiangzhe's expression changed slightly. He felt an extremely terrifying pressure coming from the surroundings, and then he was confined on the spot by this enormous pressure. Who is this envoy of chaos? His strength is so terrifying. When they saw Jiangzhe being confined in an instant, Hiyu and Dong Qixin were visibly moved. Earlier, when Yang Yi easily shattered Hiyu's divine sense needle, they did not sense the depth of his strength. But now, Jiangzhe, who was also in the late stage of the earthly immortal realm, was so easily confined that it immediately aroused the attention and fear of Hiyu and Dong Qixin. Generally speaking, the strength of the envoy of chaos was basically around the earthly immortal realm, and the peak of the earthly immortal realm was considered extremely strong. However, it was impossible for the peak of the earthly immortal realm to imprison the late stage of the earthly immortal realm so easily. There was no doubt that Yang Yi was definitely at the celestial immortal realm, and such an expert would definitely obtain a higher position in the Temple of Chaos than the envoy of chaos. All private fights are prohibited in the Temple of Chaos. Didn't the envoy of chaos in charge remind you? Yang Yi said coldly. At this moment, the envoy of chaos in charge of Jiang Zhe's group also reacted. He hurriedly rushed to Yang Yi and said in an extremely respectful manner, "Envoy Yang, it's my fault. Please forgive me." Yang Yi waved his sleeve and threw the imprisoned Jiang Zhe to the envoy of chaos. He said indifferently, "Take care of him. If he does this again, he will be disqualified from participating in the divine battle." Jiang Zhe also came to his senses and his eyes regained their rationality. He secretly regretted his impulsive behavior just now. However, it was not surprising that he would lose his composure. After all, Zhuowen was the cause of the death of the Icefire family's family master, Jiang Zuomei, and their ancestor, Jiang Binghan, also died inexplicably because of Zhuowen. The Icefire family did not know who killed Jiang Binghan. After that, Jiang Zhe went to the prophet's family to find the goddess, Yang Tianwei, and specifically asked her to calculate the cause of Jiang Binghan's death. However, because Jiang Binghan was a celestial immortal, she would have to pay a great price to calculate the cause of Jiang Binghan's death. She even declined because it would affect her lifespan. However, the goddess, Yang Tianwei, inferred the cause of Jiang Zuomei's death for the Icefire family. She died because of Zhuowen. Jiang Binghan's death did not have much to do with Zhuowen. Rather, he must have been killed by an even stronger heavenly immortal. Even so, it was generally very difficult for heavenly immortals to kill off their opponents. The only exception was when one of them was seriously wounded and their cultivation base fell. The ancestor of the Icefire family, Jiang Binghan, was seriously injured because of the battle with Feng Lei Wuji. Although his cultivation level did not drop, his injuries were extremely serious, which gave others an opportunity to take advantage of. The two pillars of the Icefire family had died directly or indirectly because of Zhuowen. The moment Jiang Zhe saw Zhuowen, he naturally lost his mind and wanted to kill Zhuowen. "I was rude." Jiang Zhe cupped his hands at Zhuowen and then glared fiercely at him. Then, under the leadership of the envoy of chaos, he returned to his team. After the four teams landed, the sky above the Chaos Temple in front of the fragment suddenly filled with red clouds. Countless clouds rolled and quickly gathered. The cloud was thousands of feet wide, and it was filled with red light. When the cloud landed on the fragment, it gradually shrank and turned into an old man. The old man had white hair and looked like an immortal. The moment he appeared, lightning flashed under his feet and auspicious beasts flew up. "I am the envoy of the Chaos Temple. This time, I am here to receive the second team." The moment the old man appeared, a majestic aura spread out and filled the surroundings. Terrifying celestial core power rushed out from the Tianling acupoint on his forehead like a volcanic eruption. Judging from the terrifying celestial core power, this old man was also a celestial immortal, and he should not be an ordinary one. "Greetings, envoy. Is my family's patriarch already in the Chaos Temple?" He Yu suddenly stepped forward and asked the old man with cupped fists. The old man looked at He Yu and smiled. "He Wushang of your family has been invited to the Chaos Temple by the Divine Master. When you arrive at your residence, you can contact He Wushang. Of course, Dong Fangxin of the Heavy Shield family is also in the Chaos Temple." "Thank you for your reminder, envoy." Dong Qixin stepped forward and cupped his fists. Zhuowen looked thoughtful. From the envoy's words, it was not difficult to guess that He Wushang and Dong Fangxin should be the patriarchs of the Wang Ren family and the Heavy Shield family. They were existences at the same level as the Wind and Thunder family and Jiang Binghan. Moreover, since this was the second team, it was obvious that other teams of the Saint Rune family had arrived at the Chaos Temple in advance. Why are there only 4 teams in the second team? Where are the teams of the Prophet's family? The old man glanced around and suddenly asked in a deep voice. As soon as he said that, a teleportation formation in the west suddenly lit up. Soon after, a figure slowly walked out. It was not difficult to tell from the person's clothes that he was an envoy of chaos. "Where are the people of the Prophet's family?" The old man stared at the person and asked in displeasure. The primal chaos emissary hurried to the old man and said respectfully, "Emissary, the goddess of the Prophet's family said that they have given up on the divine war, and the 10 prefectures around them have also given up." The old man frowned slightly. Soon after, he waved his hand and said, "Since the prophet's family has given up, then forget it." Having said that, the old man glanced around and suddenly asked, "Is there anyone called Zhuowen among you?" As soon as these words were spoken, the surroundings fell into silence. Many people had strange looks in their eyes. Zhuowen was also surprised. He had not expected the envoy of the Chaos Temple to mention his name. "I am Zhuowen. May I know what the envoy wants?" Zhuowen stepped forward and cupped his hands at the old man. The old man glanced at Zhuowen and revealed a rare kind smile. He said, "Come with me. There is a lord who wants to see you." After he finished speaking, the old man's body shook and turned into a long rainbow. He instantly flew into the distance. Zhuowen pondered for a moment. He did not look at the surprised gazes around him. He took a step forward and followed closely behind the old man. The old man's speed was not fast. As he flew forward, the clouds in front of him dispersed. Zhuowen calmly followed behind him. Although he was very puzzled that someone had summoned him, he did not ask any questions. He knew that the person who summoned him must be a big shot of the Chaos Temple if the old man at the celestial level addressed him as Lord. Even though he was puzzled, he knew that the truth would be revealed when he entered the Chaos Temple. Chapter 1754. Central Temple. What you saw just now was only the outer temple of the Chaos Temple. This time, I will bring you to the inner temple. The old man glanced at Zhuowen and continued, "Aren't you curious at all about who summoned you?" Zhuowen smiled faintly and said, "Junior is naturally curious. However, since Senior didn't say anything along the way, it's naturally inappropriate for Junior to ask. Actually, we'll naturally know who it is when we meet them." The old man sized Zhuowen up and smiled. He praised, "Not bad. There aren't many people at your age who have the same mentality as you. I only know of one person in the Primal Chaos Temple." Zhuowen was interested and asked, "Who is it?" "Haha, you should have heard of this person. His name is Yuan Hongwen. He is known as a genius that appears once in 10,000 years. He is also known as the Son of God," the old man said cheerfully. Zhuowen revealed an expression of sudden understanding. He'd heard about Yuan Hongwen as well. Supposedly, Yuan Hongwen was capable of defeating earthly immortal realm experts when he was at the half-immortal realm. Now that Yuan Hongwen had advanced smoothly into the earthly immortal realm, his strength was probably even more terrifying. Moreover, Yuan Hongwen's cultivation time was very short. Although it wasn't as exaggerated as Zhuowen's 30 years, it was definitely not more than 100 years. For a saint with a long lifespan, 100 years would pass in the blink of an eye. To be able to cultivate to the earth immortal level in such a short time, he could definitely be called a monster. In the central region, there were no juniors of any forces who could cultivate to the earth immortal level at Yuan Hongwen's age. Generally, those who could reach the earth immortal level were old monsters who had cultivated for more than 1,000 years. Moreover, Yuan Hongwen was not an ordinary earth immortal. He had the combat strength of a peak earth immortal when he just became an immortal. He was a target that many old monsters in the central region were wary of. When the old man and Zhuowen passed through the exterior of the Chaos Temple, Zhuowen saw many solemn palaces. There were many palaces, but they were not crowded together. Instead, they were scattered. Looking from afar, one couldn't see the end of them. They were much more magnificent than the city lord's mansion in the central region. Immortal Qi. The moment Zhuowen entered the inner hall, he felt a qualitative change in the surrounding energy. This surging energy was very familiar to Zhuowen. It was the immortal Qi he had absorbed from the 5-colored seal in the shattered elephant abyss. It seems like little friend Zhuowen is quite knowledgeable. The inner hall of the Primal Chaos Divine Temple is indeed filled with immortal Qi. In here, the cultivation of immortal sage experts will definitely be twice the result with half the effort. "This is a paradise for immortal sages," said the old man proudly. Zhuowen nodded. It was no wonder so many cultivators from the Central Plains wanted to join the Chaos Temple. It turned out that the Chaos Temple was so powerful. Not only were there many ancient restrictions around it, but even the immortal chi from the ancient era had been preserved. It was no wonder that the Chaos Temple was known as the oldest and most powerful force in the central region. Whether it was in terms of background or power, it was much more powerful than the 9 sacred talisman families. There are a total of 108 palaces in the inner hall of the Chaos Temple. These palaces were all found by the previous divine masters from the depths of the 6 perilous lands. They were then moved here and formed the inner hall. The restrictions inside are much more powerful than those outside. They were the palaces of the ancient almighties, said the old man with a faint smile. Zhuowen nodded. The restrictions inside the inner hall were indeed much more powerful than those outside. There were many routes that Zhuowen couldn't figure out. He could only follow the old man closely and walk on the correct path. He knew very well that if he took a wrong step in the inner hall, he would immediately trigger a powerful and terrifying ancient restriction. The consequences would be extremely serious. Moreover, Zhuowen also discovered that the 108 palaces in the inner hall were all immortal sacred weapons. Although most of them were earth immortal sacred weapons, as he went deeper, he even saw palaces that were celestial sacred weapons. When they reached the deepest part, there was an extremely majestic palace. Below the palace, there was a huge beast with a straight back and a hunched back, carrying the palace on its back. A true immortal sacred weapon? Seeing the magnificent palace, Zhuowen's eyes narrowed and he couldn't help but exclaim softly. The aura that the palace revealed was too magnificent. It made Zhuowen feel as if he was facing the Black Dragon Palace. Moreover, this palace was not like Zhuowen's palace. Due to the limitation of his strength, he couldn't unleash the full power of the Black Dragon Palace. This palace completely revealed the aura of a true immortal sacred weapon. The aura was extremely ancient and vicissitudes of life. It was precisely because the aura of the hall was too terrifying that the giant beast carrying the hall was unable to stand up. It could only remain in a half-squatting position with its spine bent, quietly carrying the magnificent hall. Moreover, the huge beast that was pressed down by the palace had an extremely vast aura. If Zhuowen was not wrong, this huge beast's strength was probably not weaker than a celestial immortal. Roar! The moment the old man and Zhuowen approached, the huge beast suddenly opened its eyes. A bloodthirsty and terrifying light burst out from the huge beast's eyes. Then, an earth-shattering roar suddenly came from the huge beast's mouth. Terrifying sound waves swept over, causing Zhuowen to involuntarily take a few steps back. Fortunately, the old man was prepared. With a wave of his sleeve, he blocked the terrifying sound waves. Zhuowen didn't make a fool of himself. There's a guest. Don't make a scene, the elder coldly snorted, before retrieving a large number of scarlet fruits from his spirit ring. These fruits gave off a red fragrance. Zhuowen gently inhaled, before a strange expression appeared on his face as he said, "Immortal desire fruit?" Zhuowen naturally knew about the celestial desire fruit. It was a very rare elixir in the Central Plains. Although the celestial desire fruit was extremely rare, its grade wasn't high and its value wasn't high. In fact, in many people's eyes, the celestial desire fruit was an extremely obscure term. This was because the celestial desire fruit had the effect of causing hallucinations and excitement. If one consumed the celestial desire fruit, one would become extremely excited. The reason why the celestial desire fruit was so obscure in the eyes of many people was because it was the main ingredient in making many aphrodisiacs. Therefore, when the celestial desire fruit was mentioned, this was the first thing that came to Zhuowen's mind. However, he didn't expect that this huge beast would actually like to eat something like the celestial desire fruit. This made Zhuowen reveal a strange expression. Roar! The huge beast fiercely roared and immediately opened its bloody mouth. It directly swallowed the large number of celestial desire fruits. After chewing a few times, it let out a satisfied roar. Then, the huge beast lowered its body and no longer obstructed the old man and Zhuowen. "This is?" Zhuowen asked in surprise. "This beast is the mount of the Divine Master. Its name is Dao Tai and it has the bloodline of the ancient fierce beast Dao Tai. This fellow is extremely gluttonous and almost eats everything. However, the only thing that can truly satisfy it is the celestial desire fruit. If you want to enter the central divine palace, you have to feed it celestial desire fruit. The old man smiled bitterly. Little friend Zhuowen, that lord only summoned you. Therefore, I can only escort you here. The old man said in a straightforward manner. Zhuowen glanced at the palace on the back of the huge beast and immediately turned to the old man. He cupped his fists and said, "Thank you for leading the way, elder." The old man waved his hand and said, "Little friend Zhuowen is too polite. Since you were summoned to the central divine palace, it is clear that the Lord values you. This old man can see that you are not an ordinary person. In the future, I am afraid that we will have to rely on you in the central divine palace." With that, the old man cupped his fists and took his leave. Zhuowen glanced at the huge beast in front of the great hall. Immediately, he cautiously rushed towards the door of the great hall. At this moment, the door of the great hall slowly opened. Two graceful female servants wearing light veils walked out from within. "Are you Lord Zhuowen?" The two maids bowed and asked. "Yes," Zhuowen said. "The divine master is in the depths of the palace. Please follow us." After they finished speaking, the two maids slowly led the way. Moreover, it was unknown whether it was intentional or not, but when the two maids led the way, they actually intentionally or unintentionally revealed their pure white jade legs under their muslin skirts. Moreover, their walking posture was also filled with enchanting and charm. Zhuowen glanced at them indifferently and did not look at them for long. He just followed them silently. The two maids also noticed Zhuowen's expression from the corner of their eyes and their faces became gloomy. Although the maids had good cultivation and could be considered as strong experts in the central region, after entering the chaotic divine palace, they were extremely mediocre and could only be maids. They knew very well that if they wanted to change their fate, it was impossible to do so by themselves. They had to climb up the social ladder. Their faintly discernible actions just now were actually a kind of hint. As long as Zhuowen slightly transmitted a message, these two maids were completely willing to become Zhuowen's cauldrons and subordinates after the matter. Unfortunately, Zhuowen did not have such thoughts. Instead, he pondered about the divine master that the two maids had mentioned. Without a doubt, the divine master should be the middle-aged man who had interacted with him in the shattered skull abyss, because the old celestial saint master had addressed the middle-aged man as the divine master. The envoy didn't say that the divine master wanted to see me. Instead, he said that some great person wanted to see me. Could the great person that the envoy mentioned be the divine master? Zhuowen thought. Before long, the two maids led Zhuowen to an extremely large hall. Afterward, the two maids bowed and left the hall. Before they left, the two of them even gave a few more hints. Unfortunately, Zhuowen did not pay any attention to them. Zhuowen stared at the hall. His gaze quickly fell on a figure in the center of the hall. The figure was extremely broad and dignified. Just by standing there, he gave off an invisible pressure. Zhuowen's breathing quickened and his heartbeat quickened. The figure slowly turned around, revealing an extremely resolute face. He glanced at Zhuowen and said with a smile, "Young friend, we meet again. Greetings to the Divine Master. May I ask why the Divine Master has summoned me?" Zhuowen clasped his hands together and asked politely. The middle-aged man before him was the middle-aged man that Zhuowen had met in the shattered skull abyss. He was also the Divine Master of the chaotic Divine Palace. Chapter 1755. The true meaning of Buddha. Someone else? Who is it? Zhuowen was surprised. Apart from the Master God and Elder Gu, he did not know anyone else in the Primal Chaos Temple. Moreover, Elder Gu did not have a good temper. Back then, he did not have a good impression of Zhuowen. It was impossible for him to meet him personally. The Master God smiled but did not say anything. Instead, he looked at the right corner of the hall. A figure slowly walked out from the corner. Zhuowen looked over and his pupils shrank. He could not help but say in a deep voice, "I did not expect it to be you, senior, haha. Zhuowen, we meet again. Are you surprised to see me now?" The figure slowly walked out from the shadows. Soon after, a sturdy figure was revealed. The person looked to be in his 30s. He wore a loose monk's robe and his hair was as smooth as a mirror. At this moment, there was a faint smile on his face. The person was none other than the fighting Buddha demon saint, Shiji, whom Zhuowen had rescued from the smoke whale. Previously, Shiji had wanted to investigate what had happened back then, so he had been separated from Zhuowen. He had not expected to meet him in the Primal Chaos Temple. Zhuowen knew that Shiji's appearance in the Primal Chaos Divine Temple was not without reason. It was likely that Shiji was planning to inquire about the truth of what happened back then. After all, the Primal Chaos Divine Temple was able to survive until now. It was likely that it had records of the calamity 10,000 years ago. If the two of you have important matters to discuss, I will not disturb you any further. However, I hope that Brother Shi will not forget what you promised me. The Divine Master took a deep look at Shiji. Soon after, he let out a long laugh and prepared to leave the hall. However, Zhuowen suddenly said, "Senior Divine Master, what you promised this junior back then." The Master God paused. However, he did not even raise his head as he said, "Zhuowen, don't worry. I, Do Hua, will naturally do what I say. If you become the #1 war god in this battle of gods, I will personally invite Elder Jiyu to save your wife." After saying that, the Divine Master strode out of the hall, leaving only Zhuowen and Shiji behind. Shiji looked fearfully at the Divine Master who had left. Then, he stared at Zhuowen who was in front of him. After a moment of silence, he said in a deep voice, "Zhuowen, you shouldn't have come here. Even though you have obtained the right to enter the ancient battlefield, the ancient battlefield is a dangerous place. You are quite powerful, but you are far from being able to protect yourself in the ancient battlefield." Zhuowen glanced at Shiji and smiled, "Senior Shiji, I know you're saying this for my own good, but I'm participating in the War of the Gods this time because I have something that I must do and someone important that I must save. So, I had no choice but to come." Zhuowen's stubbornness caused Shiji to take a deep look at Zhuowen. He sighed softly, "Since that is the case, I will not say any more words of advice, lest you say that I am nagging. How is your cultivation of the immortal art?" asked the Buddha demon transformation. Zhuowen said in a deep voice, "I have barely reached the Buddha demon transformation. I should have reached the initial stage." Shiji raised his eyebrows and said, "Show me a move." Zhuowen was stunned. Then, he looked around the hall and said, "Right here?" Shiji laughed and said, "Yes, right here. Don't worry, this divine hall is a true immortal saint artifact. With your strength, you will not be able to cause any damage to its interior. Feel free to show me. This immortal art was created by me, and its might is extraordinary. If you are able to fully comprehend it, it will be of great help to you when you participate in the ancient battlefield." Zhuowen nodded when he heard this. Then, he took a deep breath and silently circulated the celestial energy within his body. After that, he pressed his palms together. Celestial energy instantly left his body and transformed into a brilliant Buddha light. I ask the Buddha and say, "A world in a flower, a Buddha in a leaf." Terrifying Buddha light shot into the sky. The Buddha light gradually wriggled and fused together to form an enormous ancient Buddha shadow. As soon as the ancient Buddha shadow appeared, it pinched its orchid fingers together and flicked them. Instantly, countless falling flowers and leaves in the surroundings drifted down. It was a magnificent and colorful scene. Shiji looked at the ancient Buddha shadow and revealed a satisfied expression. It was really not easy for Zhuowen to comprehend the Buddha demon transformation to such an extent in half a year's time. "Zhuowen, take a look at the real the Buddha demon transformation that I have executed." Shiji laughed and pressed his palms together as well. A wheel of light actually appeared behind his head. After that, a terrifying Buddha light that was millions of feet long erupted from his body. These Buddhist lights were far too terrifying. The moment these Buddhist lights appeared, the entire hall began to rumble and shake. Fortunately, Shiji had a sense of propriety in his attack and held back some of his strength. Thus, it did not cause an even more intense reaction in the hall. The Buddha light that was millions of feet long gathered together and finally formed an enormous ancient Buddha shadow that one could only look up to. The instant the ancient Buddha shadow appeared, Shiji slowly stepped out and came before the ancient Buddha shadow. He lifted his head and stared at the ancient Buddha shadow quietly. He muttered softly, I ask the Buddha and say, a world in a flower, a Buddha in a leaf, a Buddha in a leaf, a Buddha in a Zen, a body in a body. As soon as he said that, a huge body tree that was filled with falling flowers grew in front of the ancient Buddha shadow. The body tree stood in front of Shiji just like that. Then, Shiji sat down cross-legged under the body tree and chanted in a low voice. Lines of scriptures that seemed to have substance poured out from his mouth and swept into the void, lingering around the illusory image of the ancient Buddha. At that moment, the ancient Buddha shadow that Shiji had unleashed was many times larger than the one before Zhuowen. If they really had to be compared, it would be like the difference between an adult and a child. Moreover, Zhuowen also discovered that the ancient Buddha phantasm that Shiji had unleashed was filled with an indescribable spirit. The reason for this feeling was likely greatly related to the scriptures that Shiji had recited while sitting cross-legged under the body tree. With this discovery, Zhuowen focused and began to listen to the scriptures that Shiji was chanting. At the same time, he earnestly memorized every single word. Perhaps because he discovered that Zhuowen was listening, Shiji purposely slowed down his pace and repeated the contents of the scriptures. As he continued to listen, Zhuowen's eyes revealed a look of enlightenment. Soon after, he arrived before the ancient Buddha's shadow and said in a low voice, I asked Buddha and said, one flower, one world, one leaf, one Tathagata, one Zen, one body. Just as he finished speaking, a body tree slowly grew out in front of the ancient Buddha. Zhuowen rushed to the body tree, sat down cross-legged, and began to slowly recite the scripture that Shiji had just recited. As he continued to recite, Zhuowen suddenly realized that the ancient Buddha's illusory figure behind him was also showing signs of life. Moreover, with the addition of the scripture, the aura of the ancient Buddha's illusory figure was also like a ferocious beast. It continued to soar, becoming much more vast and surging than before. When Zhuowen gradually woke up from under the body tree, he discovered that the ancient Buddha shadow around him had already vanished. Shiji was silently looking at him. Seeing that Zhuowen had woken up, Shiji smiled and said, this is the true divine skill of asking Buddha. Previously, although you had only scratched the surface, you did not understand the essence of asking Buddha. Zhuowen cupped his fists and said in a deep voice, Senior Shiji, thank you for your guidance. This is a small matter. You don't have to thank me. Shiji waved his hand and said, swoosh. At that moment, a black light suddenly shot out from between Zhuowen's eyebrows and revealed Xiao Hei's figure. Xiao Hei looked deeply at Shiji and said in a deep voice, have you found out the truth of what happened back then in the Chaos Temple? Shiji's eyes flickered and said, I have only found out a part of it. The remaining part can only be obtained by helping Do Hua, the Divine Master, open the primordial battlefield. Then, can you tell us what you know? Xiao Hei asked eagerly. Back then, although Cungjie was its master, Cungjie did not reveal too much about such important matters to it. This also caused Xiao Hei to be rather vague about the truth of the catastrophe back then. Do you know that Cungjie, the divine transformation realm expert who stood at the peak of the heavenly armor continent back then, was actually not a true divine transformation realm expert. He was only a demigod. A demigod is similar to a half-immortal. His realm is higher than a true immortal but weaker than a divine transformation realm expert. He is half a step away from a true divine transformation realm expert, Shiji said. Xiao Hei narrowed its eyes and said, Master is so powerful, but he is only a demigod. Shiji nodded and said, the source of the catastrophe back then is said to have been created by a true divine transformation realm expert who came from the starry sky. The smoke whale and the heavenly insect were both brought by this divine transformation realm expert. It is said that these two terrifying monsters were merely livestock raised by this divine transformation realm expert. After he finished speaking, Xiao Hei and Zhuowen's pupils shrank. Zhuowen's heart was filled with disbelief. He did not know much about the heavenly insect, but he had entered the smoke whale's body. He knew how terrifying the smoke whale was. Such a powerful existence was merely a livestock raised by this divine transformation realm expert. This made Zhuowen feel extremely unbalanced. However, he also knew that divine transformation stage cultivators possessed powers and techniques that were beyond his imagination. In other words, The one who caused the catastrophe 10,000 years ago was a true divine transformation realm expert? Xiao He said with a frown. It should be. For some unknown reason, this divine transformation realm expert invaded the heavenly armor continent. Then, countless warriors on the continent rebelled. 10,000 years ago, the few native divine transformation realm experts led by Master Tsungjie fought against the divine transformation realm expert. As for the final result, I do not know, Shiji said with a wry smile. Then why did that divine transformation realm expert invade the heavenly armor continent? With the strength of a divine transformation realm expert, there doesn't seem to be anything on the heavenly armor continent that is worthy of such an existence's need, right? Zhuowen asked. Chapter 1756. Yunran Xiaohei's brows were tightly furrowed. Although the questions in his heart had been completely answered, a new mystery had appeared. Why did the divine transformation expert from the starry sky invade the heavenly armor continent for no reason? And what was the result of the battle that year? It only knew that Tsungjie and several God-state warriors went missing after the battle with that Huashan realm warrior. No one knew whether they were dead or alive, and that Huashan realm warrior was also missing. If there was a cause, there must be an effect. Now, they were extremely vague about the cause and effect of the catastrophe 10,000 years ago. They only knew who the culprit was, but the specific details were still a fog. Looks like we can only wait for Do Hua to hand over the remaining records to you. Xiao He sighed. Shiji nodded and said, this Do Hua really isn't simple. After the catastrophe, we've entered the difficult Dao era. However, this Do Hua was able to advance triumphantly in this difficult era and reach the true immortal realm. He can be said to be a true genius. Could it be that this Do Hua is stronger than Senior? Zhuowen asked in surprise. Shiji shook his head and said, if I was at my peak, this Do Hua Yuan wouldn't be my match. Unfortunately, I've been trapped in the smoke whale for too long. Moreover, I've also suffered heavy injuries 10,000 years ago. Now, my cultivation has dropped considerably. Even if I rely on the Buddha demon eye, I'm afraid my chances of winning are only 50-50. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. He didn't expect Shiji to have such a high evaluation of Do Hua. One must know that Shiji was the fighting Buddha demon sage. He was extremely famous in ancient times and was publicly acknowledged as an expert by countless true immortals. In that era, there were quite a few true immortal experts. To be able to stand out amongst the numerous true immortals and establish a great reputation for himself, there was simply no need to explain how strong Shiji was. All right, you should go back too. This jade token is the residence that I asked Do Hua to arrange for you. Your residence is rather close to mine. Before the battle of the gods begins, I will do my best to help you comprehend the Buddha demon transformation. This immortal technique has a total of 3 stages. The first stage is Ask Buddha, the second stage is Devil Transformation, and the third stage is Buddha Devil Transformation. When you completely comprehend this immortal technique, you can be considered to have truly completed your apprenticeship, and your strength will also undergo an earth-shattering change. Shiji waved his sleeve. Immediately, a vortex appeared before him. He pointed at the vortex and said, this vortex leads directly to your residence. You can enter by yourself. When the divine battle truly begins, I will naturally inform you. Zhuowen nodded and kept the jade tablet that Shiji had given him. Immediately, he cupped his hands together towards Shiji and entered the vortex. He felt the scenery in front of him change, and he found himself in a huge square. There was a huge fountain in the middle of the square. Moreover, the spring water from this fountain was not ordinary spring water. Instead, it was immortal spring water that was filled with immortal energy. It made people feel as if they were floating in the air. Suddenly, a burst of fragrance came from behind Zhuowen. Zhuowen turned around and saw a beautiful young woman wearing a silk dress. Sir, are you Zhuowen? The woman slightly nodded her head. Her voice was pleasing to the ear. Moreover, when she bent over, she intentionally or unintentionally revealed the snow-white skin of her chest. Zhuowen nodded his head. Junior Lin, she has been ordered by the envoy to wait for Sir here. Sir's residence has already been properly arranged for you. Sir, Please follow me. The woman cupped her hands together, and immediately led Zhuowen through the square, towards the huge palace in front of the square. However, the instant Zhuowen was about to walk out of the square, he casually glanced around. His entire body suddenly trembled, and he stopped. The woman leading the way also felt Zhuowen's abnormality behind her. She turned around and looked at Zhuowen in confusion. Zhuowen did not pay attention to the expression of the woman leading the way at all. Instead, he stared at a white jade pavilion in the southeast corner of the square. He saw an enchanting woman sitting in the pavilion. However, this woman's beautiful eyes carried a hint of sorrow that could not be removed. The reason why Zhuowen stared at this woman was naturally not because she was extremely beautiful, but because he knew her. After pondering for a moment, Zhuowen took a step forward and walked towards the pavilion. Seeing that Zhuowen was actually leaving, the woman leading the way clenched her teeth and could only slowly follow in silence. The pavilion was not big, only around 20 to 30 square meters. In the center of the pavilion was a white jade round table, and on the four sides of the round table were round stools. Zhuowen sat opposite the woman and stared at her indifferently. The woman also saw Zhuowen and her beautiful eyes shrank. She could not help but say in surprise, "Zhuowen? It's actually you? Miss Yunran, long time no see. I didn't expect to meet you here," Zhuowen said with a smile. The woman in front of him was Yunran, the senior sister of the Serene Demon Realm. She was also Wu Dai's senior sister. She was once one of the top 9 geniuses in the 9 Nether Conference and obtained the key. Zhuowen had never met Yunran in all these years in the central region. He did not expect to meet Yunran in the Primal Chaos Temple today. Moreover, what surprised Zhuowen was that Yunran's cultivation had also reached the half-immortal realm. Her cultivation speed was so fast that even Zhuowen was a little surprised. Yunran smiled faintly. However, Zhuowen could see a rich sadness in her beautiful eyes. This discovery caused Zhuowen's eyes to narrow slightly. Does Miss Yunran have any troubles? Also, where have you been training in the central region all these years? Zhuowen's eyes flickered as he asked. Yunran's beautiful eyes flashed and she said with a smile, "I have been training in the lunar battlefield. I only came out recently. This time, I came to the Primal Chaos Temple with the Master of Lunar Battlefield. Looking at Brother Zhuo's appearance, you should be participating in the God battle in the Primal Chaos Temple, right?" Zhuowen nodded and asked in return, "Miss Yunran, are you not here for the God battle?" Yunran sighed softly and shook her head, "I am not here for the God battle." Speaking of this, Yunran's beautiful eyes flickered and revealed a hesitant look. She said in a deep voice, "Brother Zhuo, can you accompany Yunran for a stroll in this square? You and I haven't seen each other for many years. We can catch up." Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. Naturally, he saw the strange look on Yunran's face. He nodded and said, "Sure." After sending away the woman who had led the way, Zhuowen and Yunran walked side by side along the fountain in the center of the square. This fountain was very wide and it was like a long winding dragon. The two of them were silent as they walked along the fountain. At the end of the fountain, there was a lush peach blossom forest. At this moment, a gentle breeze blew and the peach blossoms swayed. They fell in a riot of colors and were exceptionally beautiful. Yunran stretched out her lily-white hand and gently held a fallen flower. The sorrow in her beautiful eyes deepened and she sighed softly. The east does not flow, the west returns to the water. The falling flower leaves the forest shamefully. When the peach blossoms bloom, they are extremely beautiful and tens of thousands of people admire them. Once they die and fall, they will turn into a pile of yellow soil and will no longer be as beautiful as before. Brother Zhuo, what method do you think can allow these peach blossoms to remain in full bloom forever and not die halfway? Yunran asked softly. Zhuowen's brows furrowed slightly. He did not know why Yunran had suddenly brought up such an unimportant matter. He only felt that Yunran was acting a little strange at this moment. The falling of flowers is the law of the world. It is impossible for them to remain in full bloom forever. Even for us cultivators, misfortunes and blessings are unpredictable. Who can guarantee that everything will go smoothly for us and that we will live forever? Zhuowen said indifferently. Yunran smiled and said, "You're right. Who can guarantee that we will live forever? Just like these falling flowers, there will always be a time when they will wither. However, if we can delay this time, how wonderful would that be? Unfortunately, time is the most ruthless. It always meticulously implements the original iron law and will never be delayed. Zhuowen's brows furrowed slightly. He felt that Yun Ran's words had a deeper meaning. He looked deeply at Yun Ran and suddenly discovered that after Yun Ran finished speaking, an extremely cold yin energy flashed through her body. This cold yin energy was extremely strange, and he could even feel a trace of yang qi within this cold yin energy. This yang qi was very subtle, but it was indeed yang qi that was revealed when this yin qi reached its peak. If it were not for the ice flame saint rune on Zhuowen's body, it would have been difficult for him to sense this yin-yang qi that had suddenly appeared in Yun Ran's body. Moreover, Zhuowen discovered that this yin-yang qi had only appeared for a brief moment before it quickly submerged into Yun Ran's body. Yun Ran's face suddenly turned pale and a trace of fear appeared in her beautiful eyes. "Miss Yun Ran, are you all right?" Zhuowen frowned. As he looked at Yun Ran, he could sense that something was amiss. This was because he discovered that Yun Ran's aura was extremely unstable. Although her aura was indeed that of a half-immortal, it was not fixed and was constantly changing. At this moment, Zhuowen looked at her and discovered that her aura was only at the Sky Saint stage. Yun Ran waved her hand and said, "Brother Zhuo, I'm fine." Swoosh. Suddenly, the sound of something breaking through the air could be heard. A middle-aged woman with an indifferent expression rushed over from the palace at the end of the square. "Yun Ran, Master has summoned you. Why aren't you coming back?" The middle-aged woman said coldly. Yun Ran gritted her teeth and suddenly patted Zhuowen's shoulder, saying, "Brother Zhuo, my master has summoned me. I'll take my leave now. If we have time next time, let's meet again." After saying that, Yun Ran took a step forward and followed the middle-aged woman, turning into a long rainbow and leaving this place. However, before the middle-aged woman left, she glared coldly at Zhuowen and sent a sound transmission to him. "Boy, I don't care who you are. Yun Ran is a disciple of the lunar battlefield. Before you hook up with her, think carefully about whether you are qualified or not." Zhuowen stood quietly on the spot and frowned. He felt that there was definitely something wrong with Yun Ran. Now that he thought about it carefully, he realized that Yun Ran's words that had nothing to do with him just now might have been a warning. If Yun Ran really has something to say, she should have said it to me earlier. Why are you hemming and hawing? Could it be that there are some things that she can't say? Or is she afraid that there will be some unpredictable consequences if she says it? Zhuowen said in a low voice. Chapter 1757. The failed product. What exactly is Miss Yun Ran trying to say? Zhuowen's brows furrowed slightly. Although Yun Ran's words seemed to be completely unrelated, if one thought about it carefully, it was a little strange. Or rather, it seemed as if Yun Ran was trying to vaguely express something. After thinking for a long time, Zhuowen still could not think of anything. In the end, he could only shake his head and smile bitterly. However, he began to secretly pay attention to the pavilion Yun Ran was in. When Yun Ran and the middle-aged woman completely disappeared from Zhuowen's sight, Zhuowen's right hand gently touched his left shoulder. Yun Ran's action of gently patting his left shoulder before she left was rather strange. The moment his right hand reached into his left shoulder, he felt his palm heat up. Then, he flipped his hand and saw a line of words appear on his palm. "We will meet here 3 days from now. There is something important to discuss." The line of words only appeared for a moment before disappearing with the wind like fine sand. Zhuowen's eyes flickered, but soon after, he recovered his calm. At this moment, the woman who led the way, Lin Shi, also walked over and respectfully brought Zhuowen back to his residence. "Sir, I didn't expect you to know someone from the lunar battlefield. However, you should be careful of the people from the solar battlefield here. The masters of the lunar battlefield and the masters of the solar battlefield are naturally at odds with each other and are often at odds with each other. If the people from the solar battlefield find out that you are acquainted with someone from the lunar battlefield, I'm afraid that there will be some trouble." Before leaving, Lin Shi said this in a rather respectful manner, and then withdrew from the palace. Zhuowen was suddenly shocked. He quickly remembered the strange yin and yang energy in Yun Rant's body. Most of the yin energy was yin energy, while the extreme yin energy contained a trace of extreme yang. Moreover, these two types of yin and yang energy did not mix harmoniously. Instead, they clashed with each other, as if they were enemies, constantly clashing in Yun Rant's body. The yin and yang energies in Yun Rant's body are clashing with each other, which is why the master of extreme yin and the master of extreme yang are at odds with each other. Previously, Miss Yun Ran had even asked me how to make peach blossoms bloom forever and not die prematurely. She was actually talking about herself. In other words, her current situation is like a peach blossom that is about to wither. She could wither and die at any time. All of this must have been caused by the yin-yang qi in her body. Yun Ran must have purposely revealed this yin-yang qi to me, hinting me that the yin-yang qi referred to the master of extreme yin and the master of extreme yang. Later on, Yun Ran also said that it was a pity that time was the most heartless. However, this cultivation method of his has its advantages and disadvantages. Furthermore, as he cultivated to the later stages, the disadvantages were extremely great. This was because ordinary yin qi could no longer satisfy the master of Tai Yin. He needed to find even more powerful yin qi. Speaking of this, Yun Ran sighed softly. In order to find such powerful yin qi and help him successfully break through the shackles of his current cultivation level, he began all kinds of experiments. The stone room before you is actually one of the master of Tai Yin's laboratories. The main research here is that the master of Tai Yin will introduce his own yin qi into the bodies of virgins. If they can withstand the corrosion of the yin qi, the bodies of the virgins will produce an extreme yin qi that contains extreme yang. This method was comprehended by the master of Tai Yin from the cultivation method of the master of Tai Yin. The countless female corpses in front of you now are actually the failed experiments that could not withstand the corrosion of the yin qi. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. He stared at Yun Ran quietly and said in a low voice, "Then Yun Ran said, I believe that with your eyesight, you should have seen the condition of my body before, right? Although I've withstood the corrosion of the yin qi and even produced a trace of extreme yang, I know my condition. My body has reached its limit. Every time extreme yin and extreme yang intersect, the damage done to my body is immeasurable. Before long, I'm afraid that I'll become one of these female corpses." Zhuowen fell silent for a moment. He looked deeply at Yun Ran and reached out with his right hand to grab Yun Ran's lily-white hand. After a while, Zhuowen's expression changed. It became extremely gloomy and ugly. At this moment, the life force in Yun Ran's body had long been replaced by extreme yin and extreme yang. As the two types of energy continued to entangle her body, Yun Ran's life force was quickly being withdrawn. These extreme yin and extreme yang energies were too terrifying. With Zhuowen's current ability, it was impossible for him to expel them. Perhaps Shiji might be able to do it, but there was no guarantee because Yun Ran's life force was now like a withered flower, completely absorbed by the extreme yin and extreme yang energies. Once Yun Ran's life force completely disappeared, the extreme yin and extreme yang energies would be at their strongest. At that time, Yun Ran's death would come. Zhuowen took a deep breath and said, "Miss Yun Ran, how can I help you?" Chapter 1758. The master of Tainzhuowen stared silently at Yun Ran and said, "I know a senior at the level of a true immortal. Perhaps he can help you." Yun Ran was stunned. She smiled bitterly and said, "It's too late. I don't have much life left. Even if a true immortal is willing to help me, there's not enough time. Zhuowen, I only have one request from you right now." Zhuowen stared deeply at Yun Ran and said in a low voice, "Tell me. If I can help you, I will definitely help you. When dawn arrives, the extreme yin and extreme yang in my body will truly be born. When that time comes, take away this yin-yang qi. Do not let it fall into the hands of the master of Tai Yin because I am the only test subject that the master of Tai Yin has managed to last until now. Even if I am not perfect, I am not far from it. If the master of Tai Yin obtains this yin-yang qi, perhaps he might be able to completely break through his original shackles. I don't want to become the master of Tai Yin's sacrifice. I want him to regret experimenting on me." Yun Ran's eyes were filled with towering resentment when she said this. Her face was twisted and she looked extremely terrifying. Zhuowen fell silent when he heard this. The yin-yang qi in Yunran was something that the master of Taiyin had to obtain. If he accepted it, he would probably be hunted down by the master of Taiyin. As a result, offending a true immortal was probably not a wise decision. Yunran also saw the hesitation on Zhuowen's face. A look of disappointment appeared on her face as she said, "The Zhuowen I know isn't such a cowardly person. This yin and yang energy is very important to the master of extreme yin, but it will also be greatly beneficial to you. Let me ask you now. Do you dare to accept this yin-yang qi?" Zhuowen's eyes narrowed. Thousands of thoughts flashed through his mind. In the end, he gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "Since you dare to accept it, I naturally dare to accept it." Yunran smiled. Her smile was filled with relief. She knew that she didn't have long to live, but she wasn't willing to become the dowry of the master of extreme yin. That was why she had taken the risk this time and planned to completely hand over the yin and yang energy to Zhuowen. "Before dawn arrives, I will try my best to control the yin and yang qi in my body. When the time comes, you won't encounter too many obstacles when collecting them." As Yunran spoke, she sat down on the ground and closed her eyes to adjust her breathing, while Zhuowen quietly stood beside her. Time gradually flowed by. Dawn was about to arrive and a white glow appeared in the sky. At this moment, the deathly aura on Yunran's face became even denser, while her life force became faintly discernible. However, the yin-yang qi within her body became extremely intense. Just like the rising sun, she was filled with life force. "Zhuowen, catch it!" Yunran cried out in a lovely voice. Her jade-like hand turned into a sword and suddenly tapped the spot between her eyebrows. With a pull, an extremely terrifying white glow appeared between her eyebrows. This white glow was filled with an eerie chill. However, there were faint traces of golden glow within this white glow. The aura of this golden glow was completely different from the white glow. It was like a scorching sun that was filled with a scorching heat. The instant Yunran extracted the yin and yang qi, she suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. Her face was pale and filled with the aura of death. Then, she slowly closed her eyes and completely lost all signs of life. With a wave of his sleeve, Zhuowen directly kept the yin and yang qi into his spirit ring. Since the yin and yang qi had been dealt with by Yunran, Zhuowen was able to easily keep it. Crack! The sound of glass shattering rang out. Cracks appeared all over Yunran's body. Then, she completely shattered into countless pieces and disappeared into thin air. Looking at this scene, Zhuowen's gaze was extremely complicated. He bowed towards Yunran from afar and said in a deep voice, "Miss Yunran, if I am powerful enough in the future, I will help you take revenge." With that, Zhuowen turned around and left the stone room. At this moment, at the other end of the square, there was a huge palace. There were many valiant women standing outside the palace. Not only were there outside, but there were also many graceful women inside the palace. All the cultivators who passed by were filled with fear. This was because they knew very well that this palace was specially arranged by the primal chaos temple for the master of extreme yin. Such a powerful existence was definitely not someone that ordinary people could provoke. In the deepest part of the palace, there was a secret room. A middle-aged woman was silently guarding the door of the secret room. Zhuowen was not unfamiliar with this middle-aged woman. She was the middle-aged woman who had come to take Yunran away 3 days ago. The secret room was completely dark. There was only a cushion in the middle of the room. A feminine man in a long robe was sitting cross-legged on the cushion. The man's hair reached his waist. His eyes were slightly closed and his chest rose and fell. Waves of cold air surged out from his nose. "Oh no! Someone actually dares to steal my yin-yang qi. How audacious!" The man suddenly opened his eyes. Immediately, a terrifying cold air current swept out from the secret room. With the man as the center, the cold air current rotated continuously like a storm. "My yin-yang qi is not so easy to steal." Humph! With that, the man raised his right hand. Immediately, countless cold air currents in the secret room surged out of the palace and turned into the shadow of a python with wings in the sky above the palace. The winged serpent was formed purely by cold air currents. Countless cold air whirlpools spilled out from its body, causing the winged serpent to be filled with a sense of danger. Roar. The winged serpent roared and suddenly shot into the air, shooting towards the square in front of the palace. The winged serpent's roar naturally attracted the attention of the other experts who lived nearby. Among them, at the top of another huge palace of the Lord of Taiyin, a middle-aged man with the image of a sun on his forehead narrowed his eyes as he stared at the winged serpent in the distance. "What's wrong with that Taiyin guy? He actually used the celestial art, cold winged serpent," the middle-aged man murmured softly. It was not just the middle-aged man. The countless experts in the surrounding palaces were all alarmed. They all raised their heads and stared at the enormous cold winged serpent with surprise in their eyes. Wherever the cold winged serpent passed, the atmosphere changed drastically. Clouds surged madly as if there was a great force fluctuating within. As the winged serpent descended, from the sky, the square and the area where the cold winged serpent came into contact even showed the collapse of countless spaces. They turned into dust and scattered, causing everything in front of them to become distorted. Rumbling sounds reverberated in the sky. As the enormous winged serpent moved forward, it landed on the atmosphere. Immediately, the atmosphere collapsed with a boom, and the space within 100,000 feet was instantly reduced to dust. The shattered space even showed signs of spreading outwards. Looking from the ground to the sky, it was as if a huge hole had been pierced in the sky. The enormous cold winged serpent slowly descended from the hole and landed on the square in the end. Before the cold winged serpent landed, an unbelievably dense pressure descended. Large cracks appeared in the ground as the ground rumbled. The expressions of the countless cultivators in the chaotic divine temple changed drastically as they stared at the enormous cold winged serpent in shock. As the majestic pressure spread out, it caused their minds to tremble. A feeling that the world was about to be destroyed involuntarily rose from the bottom of their hearts. Moreover, as the cold winged serpent approached the square, terrifying dark clouds began to gather in the sky above the square. Within these dark clouds, there were countless flashes of lightning constantly flashing in the clouds. It was as if a terrifying electric serpent was moving rapidly in the clouds. What's going on? Who is it that dares to make a move in the chaotic divine temple? Isn't that too audacious? This pressure is too terrifying. It's not something that an ordinary cultivator can unleash. I'm afraid it's at least a cultivator of the sky immortal realm or above. At this moment, it was already dawn. Naturally, many cultivators appeared in the square. However, when the cold winged serpent swept over, these cultivators' hearts thumped wildly. Their faces were pale and they did not dare to get close to the cold winged serpent at all. Zhuowen stood quietly on top of the artificial mountains. He raised his head and looked at the cold winged serpent that was heading straight for him. His face was extremely gloomy. He could feel the cold aura on the cold winged serpent. He knew that the master of Taiyin already knew that the chi of yin and yang had been stolen. Furthermore, he had directly attacked from a distance, wanting to kill him with a single blow. The celestial technique of a true immortal is not something that you can contend against. "Boy, why aren't you running away?" Xiao Hei suddenly shouted from within his sea of consciousness. Zhuowen nodded. Suddenly, a pair of thunder wings spread out from his back. Then, he stepped on the ground with his right foot. His entire body was like a shuttle as he instantly left the place. Unfortunately, the cold winged serpent did not show any mercy. It chased after Zhuowen relentlessly. Its speed was not slow at all. The moment the cold winged serpent chased after Zhuowen, all the cultivators of the Earth Immortal Realm and above around the square spread out their divine senses to investigate the situation. Many cultivators also recognized Zhuowen's identity. They all had strange expressions on their faces. This Zhuowen is really a troublemaker. He actually provoked the master of Taiyin to personally deal with him. He really deserves it. He sat cross-legged in a palace. Her divine sense radiated outwards and immediately understood the situation outside. Her eyes were filled with schadenfreude. Similarly, Xuehui, Elder Ju, and the others who were acquainted with Zhuowen also used their divine senses to investigate the situation in the square. They all frowned. They also did not expect that Zhuowen, who had just arrived at the Chaos Temple not long ago, would provoke a powerful figure like the Master of Taiyin. Boy, I don't know where you came from. If you stop now, hand over the yin-yang qi, and destroy your own cultivation, I will spare your worthless life. Otherwise, you won't have a chance at all. At this moment, the cold-winged serpent let out a sharp voice as it spoke coldly to Zhuowen. Zhuowen knew that this was the voice of the Master of Taiyin. He did not pay any attention to it. His right hand formed a seal and instantly used the celestial technique, Lone Peak. Chapter 1759. The four masters of the battlefield. The cold-winged serpent opened its mouth. Instantly, terrifying cold air surged out explosively, and it instantly froze the air in the surrounding hundreds of thousands of meters into an extremely tough wall of ice. Bang! Zhuowen was caught off guard and instantly collided with the wall of ice, and then he explosively took a few steps back with a gloomy expression. Swoosh! At the instant he explosively retreated, the cold-winged serpent behind him suddenly sped up, and it directly opened its bloody mouth with the intention of swallowing Zhuowen's entire body. Zhuowen's gaze changed slightly, and then he took a step with his right foot. Space and explosive steps perfectly fused together with lightning wings, and then his speed directly rose to the limit as he instantly vanished on the spot and just happened to dodge the pouncing attack of the cold-winged serpent behind him. However, the terrifying cold air that coiled around the body of the cold-winged serpent caused Zhuowen's entire body to involuntarily tremble, and his face turned slightly pale while his lips trembled without end. I can only ask Senior Shiji to come over. Zhuowen had no choice but to flick his finger and withdraw a command token from his spirit ring. This command token was precisely the transmission command token that Shiji had given him that day, and he could use this transmission command token to summon Shiji 3 times. Rumble. However, right when Zhuowen was about to summon Shiji, Zhuowen suddenly felt an extremely blazing temperature come from his body, and then a figure that was completely covered in blazing light descended from the sky above him. After that, Zhuowen noticed to his astonishment that the figure that descended from the sky roared with laughter as his right palm suddenly grabbed the cold-winged serpent in his hand. The strange thing was that the cold-winged serpent that possessed terrifying might actually didn't have the slightest ability to resist in the hands of this figure, and it could only ceaselessly twist its body and wantonly struggle, and it was utterly useless. Son, what are you doing? I didn't offend you, so why did you charge out halfway? The cold-winged serpent roared furiously. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed, and only now did he see clearly that the figure before him that was covered in blazing light was a middle-aged man that was over 30 years old, and there was a pattern of a sun between his brows that was dazzling. The middle-aged man's aura was extremely terrifying, especially the Tianling acupoint on the top of his head. Waves of terrifying celestial core power gushed out. The celestial core power was scorching hot, and it formed a huge shadow of a sun in the void behind him. Sun Master? Zhuowen thought to himself. He knew that this middle-aged man should be the commander of the Sun battlefield, the Sun King. Haha. I can't stand people like you, who are neither male nor female, bullying a junior. I say, Taiyin, can you be a little more mature? You're already so old, yet you're still so thick-skinned to bully the young. Don't you have any shame? Taiyang laughed and said. Taiyang, you've gone too far. Do you really want to meddle in my affairs? Just you wait, I won't let you off. The cold-winged serpent roared furiously. Immediately, its body kept twisting, and the cold currents around the winged serpent suddenly expanded. Realizing that something was wrong, Taiyang threw his right hand, ready to throw the cold-winged serpent away. Unfortunately, it was too late. The cold-winged serpent rapidly expanded to the extreme, and then suddenly exploded. Countless cold currents formed a terrifying storm that directly swept Taiyang in. The storm created by the cold currents was too terrifying. Zhuowen's pupils shrank, and he couldn't help but retreat. The blood in his body was boiling, and his eyes were filled with fear. The cold-winged serpent was too terrifying. Just the aftermath of the explosion was enough to make him feel like he couldn't bear it. Moreover, the explosion was getting more and more terrifying. However, just as the explosion was about to spread, a terrifying light shot up into the sky, instantly enveloping the explosion, and then completely annihilating it. Bah! This tie-in, who is neither male nor female, is really sinister. He actually directly detonated the cold-winged serpent. A rough voice sounded. Taiyang stepped out with a gloomy look. He didn't look at Zhuowen from beginning to end. The reason why he attacked was naturally not to save Zhuowen, but because he already had a feud with the tie-in master. This time, he just wanted to use this opportunity to go against the tie-in master. Thank you for saving me, senior. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave. Zhuowen cupped his fists. His eyes flashed, and he didn't want to stay here for long. However, Taiyang sneered and said, "Kid, you stay here. That sissy tie-in master wouldn't kill you for no reason. Tell me, did you take away something important from him?" Zhuowen's eyes narrowed, but he smiled and said, "Senior, you must be joking. How could I have the ability to take away something that belongs to the tie-in master? If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave." As he spoke, Zhuowen stomped his right foot and retreated explosively, intending to leave this place. However, the Sun Lord sneered. He grabbed at the air with his right hand, and countless sun shadows appeared around Zhuowen. These sun shadows revolved around Zhuowen, forming a tight prison. "Senior, what is the meaning of this?" Zhuowen asked with a gloomy expression. Sun Master laughed and said, "You little brat, you can lie without blushing. Do you really think I don't know the reason? I'm afraid only yin and yang qi can cause that fellow Tai Yin to be so furious. That thing should be with you, right?" Zhuowen frowned. His heart was filled with exasperation. He had just gotten rid of the master of extreme yin, and now he had encountered the master of extreme yang. It had to be said that the yin-yang qi that Zhuowen had obtained was really a hot potato. "Son, you old bastard, die." At this moment, a huge cold air current suddenly swept out from the void in front of them. Everywhere it passed, countless spaces collapsed. An indescribably terrifying pressure suddenly pressed down, causing the hearts of countless cultivators in the surroundings to beat wildly. Some of them even spat out a mouthful of blood, their faces pale and bloodless. The cold current was extremely fast, arriving before the Sun Lord in an instant. Then, a feminine man in a long robe stepped forward. He pointed at the void with his right hand, and the cold current turned into a huge crescent-shaped blade chi that fell from the sky. Rumble. This blade chi was extremely terrifying. It was thousands of feet long, and the moment it fell, it caused the surrounding tens of thousands of miles to shake. The Sun Lord snorted coldly. He was not afraid at all. He clenched his right hand, and countless sun shadows surged and condensed on his right fist. Then, he stomped his right foot, twisted his waist, and punched out with his right fist. As soon as he punched out, endless golden light gushed out. Then, a terrifying fist radiance shot up into the sky like a rapidly rising sun. The intense light stimulated countless cultivators to squint their eyes subconsciously. Whether it was the fist radiance that was like a scorching sun or the blade chi that seemed to have condensed at the end of the abyss, their auras were too terrifying. When many cultivators saw this scene in the sky, their eyes were filled with fear. They could imagine that if the blade chi and the fist radiance collided, the aftermath of the collision would very likely overturn many residences and raze them to the ground. Are these two crazy? This is the inner hall of the Chaos Temple. How dare they fight here? Whoosh. At this moment, two figures flew out from the other two huge halls in the inner hall. The auras of these two figures were equally terrifying. They were almost no weaker than the masters of the Taiyang battlefield and the Tai-Yin battlefield. One of these two people was a dwarf. His face was red, and he looked like a child. This person was the master of the Great Void battlefield, Taishu. The other person was a slender young man in a black robe. However, this person looked cold and silent. He was the master of the last battlefield, Taigu. Taigu. "Let's stop them together," the master of Taishu said in a low voice. Taigu nodded. Without saying a word, he took a step forward and flew in front of the Taiyang master. He extended his right hand, and the void instantly exploded. Huge ancient tablets flew out. Each ancient tablet was thousands of feet tall. There were too many ancient tablets that flew out from the void behind Taigu. They blocked the Taiyang Master's terrifying fist radiance that was like the rising sun. At the same time, the Master of Taishu waved his sleeve. The surrounding void instantly distorted. Then, the distorted void was like mud being mixed by the Master of Taishu. It actually formed a huge void beast that was tens of thousands of feet tall. This void beast roared at the sky. It opened its mouth and swallowed the huge blade chi from the Taiyin Master into its stomach. Then, there were muffled explosions in the void beast's stomach. Clearly, the blade chi was constantly destroying the void beast's stomach. When the attacks of the Taiyang Master and the Taiyin Master were completely blocked by the Taigu Master and the Master of Taishu, Do Hua had already arrived in the central palace of the Chaos Temple with Elder Ji. After Do Hua and Elder Ji, Shiji also followed. Shiji saw Zhuowen trapped by the shadow of the sun from afar. His expression did not look too good. Taiyang Master, Taiyin Master, aren't the two of you looking down on the Chaos Temple too much? This is the inner palace of the Chaos Temple. The two of you dare to fight here. Do you think that the two of you are already very impressive? Do Hua shouted angrily as soon as he arrived. The Taiyang Master and the Taiyin Master looked at each other, but they did not refute him. The two of them had indeed gone too far. Furthermore, Do Hua was the Taigu Master of the Chaos Temple. His ability was above the two of them. The two of them did not dare to casually refute him. The two of you, tell me. What happened? Do Hua snorted coldly when he saw that the Taiyang Master and the Taiyin Master were silent. The Taiyang Master said in a low voice, Taiyin Master is too arrogant. He attacked first in the inner palace. Moreover, he bullied the weak. He attacked a little fellow who is only a half immortal. I couldn't stand it, so I stepped in to stop him. The Taiyin Master snorted coldly and said, it's that little brat who doesn't know his place. He actually took something that he shouldn't have. I already gave him a chance before. Unfortunately, he didn't cherish it at all. Chapter 1760. Mystic Frost Bead. He's just a junior. Since he took something from you, just let him return it to you. Why do you have to make such a big fuss? Do Hua said with a displeased expression. All private fights were forbidden within the Chaos Temple. This was a clear rule. Furthermore, this was the inner hall of the Chaos Temple. Private fights were even more forbidden. The Master of Lunar Light had casually started a fight here. She had completely disregarded this rule. How could Do Hua not be angry? The Master of Lunar Light looked at Zhuowen, who was not far away, and said in a low voice, I've already warned him. Unfortunately, he didn't listen. That's why I wanted to take him down. Who knew that bastard Taiyang would stop me? That's why it's like this now. Do Hua frowned slightly. Then, he waved his sleeve, and the seal around Zhuowen was released. He asked, Zhuowen, what did you take from the Master of Lunar Light? Why don't you just hand it over and we'll let this matter rest? The Master of Taiyin's eyes narrowed. Do Hua's words were clearly meant to protect Zhuowen. It wasn't just the Master of Taiyin. The Master of Taiyin, the Master of Taishu, and the Master of the Ancient Past all looked at Zhuowen in surprise. They knew the Master of Lunar Light's personality very well. If someone really dared to touch his things, he wouldn't let them off easily. Do Hua's words were obviously trying to settle the matter peacefully. Master God, let it go just like that. This brat is too daring. After taking something from me, he still thinks it's his. He didn't say anything. Shouldn't he be punished? The Master of Lunar Light said coldly. Punishment? You touched my disciple, and you want to punish him? Who do you think you are, Master of Lunar Light? Shiji rushed to Zhuowen's side and grabbed his right hand. He felt his pulse, and when he found that Zhuowen was fine, he let out a sigh of relief. Then, he stared at the Master of Lunar Light with a gloomy expression. The Master of Lunar Light frowned and stared at Shiji. He snorted coldly and said, Who are you? Do you want to make a decision for this brat? Zhuowen, step back. I'll make the decision for you, Shiji said to Zhuowen. Then, he calmly stared at the Master of Lunar Light. A terrifying aura suddenly surged out from his body. The moment this aura swept out, the Lunar Master's expression changed drastically. He was not the only one. The expressions of the three masters of the Taiyang, Ancient, and Great Void battlefields beside him changed as well. Shiji's aura was too terrifying. It actually gave them a sense of danger. They had only felt this sense of danger from Dohua before. Recalling that Shiji had walked out of the central palace with Dohua, there was no doubt that Shiji's strength was not much weaker than Dohua's. This brat actually has such a powerful master. The master of Lunar Master's expression was ugly, as if he had turned purple. The master of Solar Light, the master of Ancient Light, and the master of Taishu looked at Zhuowen deeply. They had not paid much attention to Zhuowen before, but now, they became cautious. Although the four masters of the battlefield were all true immortals, they were only early true immortals. However, the aura that Shiji released was even stronger than early true immortals. Most likely, he was a middle true immortal like Dohua. For such an existence to deal with the four masters of the battlefield, the result would definitely be a crushing one. Not only the four masters of Lunar Light, but all the earthly immortals who stayed in the inner hall and used their divine consciousness to check the area were also in disbelief. How could this brat know such a strong person? This is impossible. Within a large hall, Hiyu's expression was gloomy. Especially after he discovered that Shiji had stood up for Zhuo Wen and erupted with an aura that caused even his heart to tremble, his heart began to thump madly. There was no doubt that Shiji was a true immortal. He was more terrifying than the Wang Ren clan's patriarch. I didn't expect my lord to have such a strong background. Xuehui's expression was complicated, but more than that, he was excited and expectant. Elder Zhu Shong had the same thoughts as him. As for Ji Feilong and Xue Tianze, the two earthly immortals from the Wind and Thunder Prefecture, they had different expressions. No one knew what they were thinking. The master of Lunar Light took a deep breath and said, "I can let this go, but this brat must return what he took from me. Otherwise, I won't let this go." Shiji frowned. He turned to Zhuowen and said, "Zhuowen, did you really take something from the master of Lunar Light?" Zhuowen looked calm. He glanced at the master of Lunar Light and did not say anything. He only shook his head. From Zhuowen's point of view, the yin-yang qi didn't belong to the master of Taiyin. Instead, it belonged to Yunran. What Zhuowen took was a relic that Yunran had given to him. It wasn't stolen from the master of Taiyin. Shiji looked deeply at Zhuowen. Then, he turned to the master of Lunar Light and said, "Since Zhuowen did not take it, let's drop the matter." The master of Lunar Light's expression froze. He said eerily, "Drop the matter? This brat took away my most important item, the yin-yang qi. I think everyone knows how valuable it is. This is not something that this brat can take. Yin-yang qi? I didn't expect you to succeed." The masters of the Sun battlefields, the Great Void battlefields, and the Primordial battlefields looked at each other in shock. They naturally knew about the yin-yang qi. The master of the Great Void had been experimenting with the yin-yang qi for almost 1,000 years. However, the yin-yang qi was not easy to produce. Hence, the master of Lunar Light had failed countless times. At first, they thought that the master of Taishu would not succeed. They did not expect that Yunran would succeed in producing the yin-yang qi. If he had this yin-yang qi, the master of Taishu might be able to use the power of the yin-yang qi to directly break through the early stage of the true immortal realm and reach the middle stage of the true immortal realm. Dohua narrowed his eyes. He looked deeply at the master of Lunar Light. Then, he looked at Zhuowen, who was not far away. He was deep in thought. "Oh, are you trying to make something up?" Shiji said coldly. The master of Lunar Light snorted. "Of course not. If this brat is willing to let me see what is in his spirit ring, then the truth will be revealed. If there is no yin-yang qi in his spirit ring, then I will drop the matter and treat it as a misunderstanding. However, if there is, then he must hand it over and apologize to me seriously. Divine Lord, this happened in your Chaos Temple. I think you can make the decision, right?" Dohua frowned slightly. He looked at Shiji and said, "Brother Shiji, if the master of Lunar Light is telling the truth, then it is not impossible for him to check Zhuowen's spirit ring. This can also prove Zhuowen's innocence, right?" Shiji revealed a hesitant expression. He glanced at Zhuo Wen behind him, shook his head, and said, Zhuo Wen has inherited one of my immortal techniques. He can be considered half a disciple of mine. How can my disciple allow others to casually inspect his entire body? With that, a cold light flashed through Dohua's eyes. He said, Shiji, don't go too far. The master of Taiyin has already made enough concessions. You should show your sincerity now. Just checking Zhuo Wen's spiritual ring isn't going too far. Shiji's eyes were cold. He said, Dohua, what? Do you want to fight me? Dohua's brows knit tightly when he heard this, and he felt a slight headache. He was naturally aware of Shiji's origins. He was the renowned fighting Buddha demon saint from the ancient times, and his original cultivation was in existence at the peak of the true immortal realm. When the fighting Buddha demon saint first found the Chaos Temple, Dohua was shocked. The fighting Buddha demon saint's whereabouts were unknown 10,000 years ago. In the records of the Chaos Temple, it was said that the fighting Buddha demon saint had died. 10,000 years later, the fighting Buddha demon saint had appeared again. There were probably many untruths in the records of the past. Moreover, for some reason, the fighting Buddha demon saint's cultivation had fallen greatly. His cultivation was similar to Shiji's, at the mid-true immortal realm. However, Dohua knew that even if the fighting Buddha demon saint's cultivation had fallen to the same level as his strength was definitely beyond imagination. If Shiji fought with him, he might be suppressed. Divine Lord, why are you afraid of this person? With the Chaos Temple's foundation and the four of us masters of the battlefield, this person is nothing, the master of lunar light urged. Shut up. Dohua shouted coldly. This cold shout immediately shut the master of Taiyin up. The eyes of the three masters of the battlefields of Taiyang, Taishu, and Immemorial flashed. They could see many clues from Dohua's attitude. It seemed like Dohua was actually afraid and wary of this bald monk. This discovery caused the three of them to narrow their eyes. They were even more afraid of Shiji. Dohua smiled and said, when the time comes, we will open up the antiquity battlefield together. Let's not ruin the harmony now. Saying this, Dohua was silent for a moment. Then, he said to the master of Lunar Light, how about this? I'll give you the Dark Frost Pearl in the Chaos Temple. Take it as compensation for losing the Yin-Yang Qi. Dark Frost Pearl? The masters of the immemorial battlefields, Great Void, and Great Solar, all exclaimed. They looked at Dohua in surprise. They did not expect Dohua to be so generous as to take out the Dark Frost Pearl. It should be known that the Dark Frost Pearl was an item of extreme yin and extreme cold. It was obtained by the previous divine master of the Chaos Temple by chance in the deepest part of the lunar battlefield. It was of great benefit to warriors who cultivated yin and cold qi. The master of lunar light had always wanted to possess the Dark Frost Pearl in the Chaos Temple. Unfortunately, the Chaos Temple was much more powerful than the Taiyin battlefield. Dohua did not agree before, so it was difficult for him to obtain it even if he wanted it. Now, Dohua had taken the initiative to take out the Dark Frost Pearl to compensate the master of lunar light for Shiji. It could be seen how much Dohua valued Shiji. The master of lunar light was not a fool. From Dohua's attitude, he could tell that the bald monk was not simple. Otherwise, Dohua would not value him so much and even give him the extremely precious Dark Frost Pearl. Chapter 1761. Celestial Market. Since it's a misunderstanding, let's end it here. I'll take this little guy and leave first. Shiji's eyes were cold as he clasped his hands at Dohua. Then, he waved his sleeves and left with Zhuowen. After Shiji left, the master of Taiyin's face was extremely gloomy. He looked at Dohua and said, Divine Master, you have to give us an explanation, right? Dohua's eyes were calm as he said, this person is not someone you can afford to offend. You might not be familiar with his name, but you've probably heard of his nickname. What's his name? The usually taciturn immemorial master asked, which was rare for him. His name is Shiji. In the ancient times, his nickname was the Fighting Buddha Demon Saint. Dohua said calmly. The master of Taiyan's expression changed when he heard this. He felt as if there were countless thunderbolts exploding in his head. Then, he couldn't help but take a few steps back. It wasn't just the master of Taiyan. The masters of Taiyang, Taishu, and immemorial battlefields were all shocked. Their expressions weren't any better than the master of Taiyan's. It's the fighting Buddha demon saint. That's a legendary peak expert from the ancient times. It's said that the fighting Buddha demon saint was a peak true immortal in the ancient times. He crushed countless true immortals. Many experts trembled when they heard his name. Didn't they say that the fighting Buddha demon saint died? He's actually still alive. Taishu said with a serious expression. The usually taciturn immemorial master's eyes flashed. He said, I once entered the Nether Corp's forbidden grounds, but I didn't feel any aura of the fighting Buddha demon saint. That means that the fighting Buddha demon saint doesn't exist in the Nether Corp's forbidden grounds. Then, where has he been for the past 10,000 years? The Taiyang master's expression darkened. He said, 10,000 years ago, the fighting Buddha demon saint was a peak true immortal. Then, 10,000 years have passed. Doesn't that mean that he's reached an even higher level? On the other hand, the master of Lunar Master's face was gloomy. If what the master of Sun said was true, that Shiji was the fighting Buddha demon saint, and that his strength had reached the legendary realm, then the master of Lunar Master began to regret his reckless actions. At the same time, he was able to understand why Do Hua would be so tolerant of Shiji. After all, Shiji was a renowned expert from the ancient times. Even Do Hua did not dare to offend him. However, Do Hua shook his head and said, Shiji isn't as powerful as you imagine him to be. He said that he has been trapped in the smoke whale for 10,000 years, and his cultivation has regressed instead of advancing. He's currently at the mid-true immortal realm, but I don't know if he has any more trump cards up his sleeve. However, there is one thing. Shiji is the only expert who has survived from the ancient times. The ancient times were different from the present. The fact that Shiji was able to command the winds and clouds during the peak of martial arts is enough to prove that he's extraordinary. So, unless you have no other choice, you definitely can't offend someone like him. The four masters of the battlefield looked at each other and nodded. Although Shiji's cultivation was not as powerful as they had imagined, he was someone from the ancient times after all. They would never believe that he did not have any powerful trump cards up his sleeve. That little bastard Zhuowen is really lucky, the master of Lunar Master said, extremely unwilling to accept this outcome. Do Hua glanced at the master of Lunar Master indifferently and said, before the ancient battlefield opens, you definitely can't touch Zhuowen. Otherwise, there's no need for Shiji to do anything. I might just destroy you directly. After the ancient battlefield opens, some of the old guys hidden in the 6 perilous places might come out. When that time comes, the ancient battlefield will become extremely chaotic. By then, whatever you want to do to Zhuowen will have nothing to do with me. I won't stop you. The master of Lunar Master's eyes lit up. He immediately cupped his fists at Do Hua and said in a low voice, Don't worry, Master God. I won't act recklessly. Millimeter, it's good that you know. Now, all of you can leave. The opening of the ancient battlefield can't be done without your help. As Do Hua spoke, he waved his sleeve and left with Elder Jiyu. The four masters of the battlefield looked at each other and returned to their respective palaces. In the entire inner hall, the many earthly immortals who used their divine senses to investigate were all shocked. In particular, some of them who knew Zhuowen felt extremely conflicted. Originally, they thought that Zhuowen was just a lone wolf. They did not expect him to have such a powerful backer supporting him. If it's not necessary, it's best not to provoke Zhuowen. Many earthly immortals began to fear Zhuowen. Although Zhuowen was only a half-immortal, not to mention the great things he had done in the past, his identity as the disciple of the fighting Buddha demon saint was enough to make many people shrink back. A long rainbow flew over and landed in a courtyard, revealing the figures of Zhuowen and Shiji. Shiji glanced deeply at Zhuowen and said, Zhuowen, there's still some time before the Battle of Gods begins. It's best that you cultivate properly during this period of time. If you encounter any problems with your cultivation, Then feel free to come look for me. After saying that, Shiji gave Zhuowen a few more instructions. Then, he waved his sleeve and left the courtyard. Zhuowen's eyes flickered. From the beginning to the end, Shiji did not ask whether he had really taken away the item of the master of Taiyin. Instead, he resolutely helped Zhuowen bear the burden. This made Zhuowen feel a warm current in his heart. Time gradually passed. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. During this period of time, Zhuo Wenfan would take the initiative to look for Shiji whenever he encountered a problem in his cultivation. Shiji would also explain it in great detail and seriously, giving Zhuo Wenfan a feeling of enlightenment. As for the Battle of the Gods, the time had not been completely set. However, Zhuowen heard from Shiji that Do Hua had decided to make sufficient preparations for the primordial battlefield before starting the Battle of the Gods. As for the yin and yang qi he had obtained from Yunran, Zhuowen did not recklessly absorb it because Xiao He had said that the yin and yang qi was incomplete. If he absorbed it, there would probably be significant side effects. As a result, Zhuowen did not plan on using the yin and yang qi. On this day, Zhuowen sat in his palace. Suddenly, a golden streak of light shot in from outside. Afterwards, a row of golden characters appeared before Zhuowen. Zhuowen studied the golden characters. His eyes flickered, and then he waved his sleeve and left the palace. Two figures hovered outside Zhuowen's palace. They were none other than Xue Hui and Old Man Zhu, who had come with Zhuowen. When they saw Zhuowen come out, Xue Hui and Old Man Zhu immediately beamed with joy. Soon after, they arrived before Zhuowen in a respectful manner. Their faces were filled with eagerness. Zhuowen glanced at Xue Hui and Old Man Zhu nonchalantly. Ever since the incident with the master of Taiyin, the two of them would often visit him. Of course, apart from the two of them, there were also a few other earthly immortals who would often visit Zhuowen. They wanted to establish a good relationship with Shiji through Zhuowen. Zhuowen basically refused to see the other earthly immortals with such intentions. However, Xue Hui and Old Man Zhu were part of the group that had come together. Moreover, he had some friendship with the two of them, so Zhuowen would occasionally see them. However, he basically did not come out to greet them personally. However, he had come out this time because the information that the two of them had provided had piqued his interest. Brother Xue, Brother Zhu, is the immortal market established in the Chaos Temple really as miraculous as you said? Zhuowen asked in a deep voice. Xue Hui smiled and said, My lord, you probably don't know. The immortal market is a grand event that happens once in 100 years. Think about it, the Central Plains is so vast and there are so few celestial sage experts. If the Chaos Temple did not summon them, how could so many celestial sage experts gather here? I'm afraid this is the only time in 1,000 years. Treasures that are hard to find outside can be easily found in the immortal market. After all, this is a collective trade between the peak experts of the Central Plains. Moreover, the organizer is the #1 beauty of the everlasting family, Ji Chenyang. With the status of the everlasting family and Ji Chenyan's reputation, this immortal market will be extremely lively. Old Man Zhu nodded and said, Brother Xue is right. This immortal market is definitely unprecedented. After all the celestial sage experts of the Central Plains have gathered here. If you want to exchange for any treasures, this immortal market will not disappoint you. Ji Chenyang of the everlasting family? Zhuowen raised his eyebrows. The everlasting family was the family that controlled the everlasting saint talisman among the 9 great saint talisman families. Moreover, the everlasting family was publicly acknowledged as the #1 family among the 9 great saint talisman families. Whether it was the number of experts or the foundation of the everlasting family, they were far superior to the other 8 great saint talisman families. Of course, the most terrifying one was the everlasting saint talisman. The first ancestor of the everlasting family, who possessed the everlasting saint talisman, was extremely talented. He studied the everlasting saint talisman alone and created a cultivation technique that made many experts of the Central Plains pale. This cultivation technique was called the art of everlasting immortality. Although the cultivators of this cultivation technique were unlikely to be immortal, Their recovery ability was extremely strong. Ordinary cultivators would find it difficult to kill the experts of the everlasting family who cultivated the art of everlasting immortality. Therefore, the cultivators of the everlasting family were far more terrifying than other cultivators of the same cultivation level. They could often easily fight those of a higher cultivation level. Among the 9 great Saint Talisman families, only the everlasting family could comprehend a powerful cultivation technique from the Saint Talisman and use it as a medium to communicate with the Saint Talisman. This was also the main reason why the everlasting family was ranked number 1 among the 9 great Saint Talisman families. After all, the art of everlasting immortality alone could create an extremely troublesome expert. Moreover, the everlasting Saint Talisman was extremely powerful. It was said that the person who controlled the everlasting Saint Talisman possessed endless vitality and luck. Even a peak true immortal would find it difficult to kill the person who controlled the everlasting Saint Talisman. Chapter 1762. Stop. It is said that the divine child of the primal chaos divine temple, Yuan Hongwen, will be participating in this immortal market as well. Even some heavenly immortals from the older generation might show up. The liveliness of this immortal market will be unprecedented, Xuehui said with a sigh. Old man Zhu nodded in agreement. With the fame of Ji Chenyang and Yuan Hongwen, even if they were not going to the celestial market to exchange for items, they could still take a good look at these 2 geniuses. Whether it was Ji Chenyang or Yuan Hongwen, they were both rising stars. They had not cultivated for long, but their cultivation had reached the earthly immortal realm. Their combat strength was enough to make the earthly immortals of the older generation pale in fear. As for the rising stars of the other 8 holy talisman families, they were barely satisfactory. They were not as famous as the 2 of them. Of course, even their strength was far inferior to the 2 of them. Many people had high hopes for the 2 of them. They were peerless geniuses who could break through to the true immortal realm in the future. They were also idols of the younger generation. Zhuowen nodded. He was getting more and more interested in the celestial market. He said, "Let's go take a look." Xuehui and old man Zhu looked at each other and smiled. Soon after, the 3 of them turned into a long rainbow and left the place. However, before going to the celestial market, Zhuowen went to see Bai Qing. After entering the Chaos Temple, he had not seen Bai Qing since they parted ways. After chatting with Bai Qing for a while, Zhuowen, Xuehui, and old man Zhu left the place together. The celestial market was located in the center of the inner hall. After the immortal family had obtained the consent of the divine master Do Hua, the Chaos Temple had personally reserved a large piece of land for the immortal family. A huge fragment of land floated in the center of the market. On the fragment of land, there were many beautiful pavilions and pavilions. White mist was dense, and the celestial qi was faintly discernible. It looked like a paradise. On the fragment of land, figures were faintly discernible. It was like a mirage. The pavilions of the celestial realm were extraordinary. When Zhuowen and the other 2 flew towards the fragment of land, an invisible ripple spread out a few hundred feet away from the land. Then, Zhuowen and the other 2 were blocked outside. Restriction. Zhuowen looked up and down at the ripples that were constantly surging outside the fragment, and a strange look appeared in his eyes. The moment the 3 of them touched the seal, a figure slowly flew out from the fragment. The person wore a dark green robe, and there was a strange picture drawn on the front of the robe. The picture was of a person with both arms stretched out. This person's aura was not strong. He was only a half immortal. However, there was a trace of arrogance in his eyes. Zhuowen and the other 2's gazes landed on the pattern on this person's robes, and they all shivered. The 3 of them naturally recognized the pattern on this person's robes. It was the symbol of the Eternal Life Clan. Clearly, this person should be a disciple of the Eternal Life Clan. The man glanced at Zhuowen and pointed at old man Zhu and Xuehui. "You 2 have the right to enter this place. As for this person, he doesn't. Tell him to scram." Old man Zhu and Xuehui both looked at the man strangely. Zhuowen's name was like thunder to their ears. This person actually did not recognize Zhuowen. However, when the two of them discovered that this person was only a half-immortal, they immediately understood. Although the matter of the Master of Extreme Yin a month ago had caused a huge commotion, only experts at the Earth Immortal level and above knew about it. After all, only martial artists whose cultivation had reached the earthly immortal stage and above possessed divine sense, and the inner palace covered an extremely large area. Other than a small number of half-immortals who knew of Zhuo Wen, other martial artists below the half-immortal stage probably didn't know of Zhuo Wen. As for this man from the Eternal Life clan, he probably did not recognize Zhuo Wen at all. Little brother, this person is our companion. Can you make an exception? Xuehui said with a smile. At the same time, he took out immortal crystals from his sleeve and handed them to the person. The person glanced at the immortal crystals in Xuehui's hand and said coldly, 100 immortal crystals? Are you trying to get rid of a beggar? Give me 1,000 immortal crystals and I might consider letting this person in with you. Otherwise, I'll tell him to scram. Xuehui's pupils constricted. His expression immediately became unsightly. There was a ball of fire in his heart, but he did not dare to get angry because the person before him was from the Eternal Life clan. Even if he was only a half-immortal, he did not dare to offend him too much. Just as Old Man Zhu was about to speak, a hand stretched out and stopped him. Zhuowen slowly walked in front of the restriction. He calmly stared at the man before him and said, I'll give you 3 breaths of time. If you don't let us in, I'll break this restriction completely. Once he said that, the man before him looked at Zhuowen strangely. Then, he laughed loudly as if he had heard an extremely funny joke. He said, break this restriction? Are you joking? You're joking, right? You're simply making me laugh to death. Let me tell you, although this restriction isn't as powerful as the ancient restrictions in the Primal Chaos Temple, it's still a powerful restriction that was set up by a Heaven Saint Master of our Eternal Life clan and a dozen profound Saint Masters. Do you think a brat like you can break it just by talking? Ha ha. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He thought to himself that the Eternal Life clan really did have a strong foundation. Normally, other Saint Talisman clans had very few profound Saint Masters, so it was impossible for them to nurture a Heaven Saint Master. However, the Eternal Life clan actually had a Heaven Saint Master. It could be seen that the Eternal Life clan's foundation was much deeper than other Saint Talisman clans. Old Man Zhu Shong and Xuehui looked at Zhuo Wen strangely. From what they could recall, Zhuo Wen had never used any talent related to mental strength before. Zhuo Wen did not pay any attention to the man's mockery. Instead, he began to count. The man's eyes narrowed slightly as he sneered. He looked at Zhuo Wen as if he was looking at a joke. He wanted to see just why the young man was so confident that he could break through the restrictions cast down by the Heaven Saint Master. 2. Zhuo Wen continued to count while Xuehui and Old Man Zhu looked at each other. They wondered if Zhuo Wen really knew how to break the restriction in front of them. The restriction in front of them was extremely complicated. Moreover, from the surging fluctuations on its surface, it was definitely not simple. Even a peak earthly immortal would find it extremely difficult to break it. 3. When Zhuo Wen counted to 3, a cold smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Then, he suddenly jumped up and pointed his right hand at his forehead. Instantly, a terrifying spiritual energy gushed out violently. This mental energy was extremely vast, forming an ocean-like existence around Zhuo Wen. Waves of mental energy flickered, like a tsunami that was tens of thousands of feet high. A profound Saint Master? When Zhuo Wen revealed his spiritual force, the man inside the restriction narrowed his eyes in surprise. However, he soon sneered inwardly. This restriction was set up by a Heaven Saint Master and more than 10 profound Saint Masters. It was impossible for a single profound Saint Master to break it. Xuehui and Old Man Zhu looked at each other and saw the surprise in each other's eyes. They did not expect Zhuo Wen to be so secretive. Not only was his martial Dao so powerful, even his spiritual force was not weak. I'm afraid a profound Saint Master is not enough. After all, this restriction was set up by a Heaven Saint Master. Xuehui shook his head and sighed. Zhuo Wen naturally did not care about what others thought. At this moment, his eyes flickered as he coldly stared at the invisible restriction in front of him. Then, he formed a seal with his right hand. Runes flew out of his hand like a swarm of locusts. They were densely packed and extremely terrifying. Although the restriction before them was indeed powerful, Zhuo Wen had grasped the devouring curse restriction that was extremely famous even in ancient times. An ancient restriction like that was much more powerful than an ordinary restriction. Although Zhuo Wen had not reached the Heaven Saint Master level, with the devouring curse restriction and the countless ancient restriction formations he had studied in the Shattered Elephant Abyss, it could be said that he had reached the level of a Heaven Saint Master. Although the restriction in front of him was powerful, in Zhuo Wen's eyes, there were several loopholes. Countless runes covered the entire surface of the restriction. Soon after, the runes seemed to be searching for something as they spread to other parts of the restriction. Roughly 10 breaths of time later, a cold light flashed through Zhuo Wen's eyes. Then, he suddenly flashed towards the surface of a restriction 100 meters to the east. Next, he pointed his finger and suddenly tapped on that spot. TSS. 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 Countless runes formed vortex-like existences. These vortexes followed Zhuo Wen's finger and poured into the point, forming an extremely sharp and terrifying funnel-shaped vortex. Break. Zhuo Wen snorted coldly. He raised his right finger and pointed it down. Runes surged out of his fingertip and the entire restriction in the surroundings began to shake violently as if there was an earthquake. The smile on the man's face completely froze. He stared fixedly at Zhuo Wen and said in disbelief, "How is this possible? How did you manage to shake this restriction? It's unbelievable." Zhuo Wen's expression was indifferent. He immediately formed a seal with his free left hand, and then quickly pointed at his right arm. Immediately, the sleeve of his right arm was torn to pieces, and then runes wriggled on his right arm like tadpoles. At that moment, he had pushed the devouring curse restriction to the limit. He stared at the floor and suddenly pointed at it, smashing it down viciously. He repeated this several dozen times and cracks actually began to appear on the surface of the restriction. Boom. 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 The terrifying sound of the restriction colliding and shattering rang out in the sky above the fragment. Thump. Thump. The man's face was pale. He could not help but take a few steps back. He muttered in a low voice, "It's over. The restriction has been broken. I will definitely be punished by the family." Perhaps realizing that something was wrong, the man hurriedly shouted at Zhuo Wen, "Why aren't you stopping? Do you want to bear the wrath of our eternity family?" However, Zhuo Wen sneered. He suddenly pressed down with his right hand, and with a cracking sound, traces of cracks began to spread out from his fingertips in all directions. Chapter 1763. Ji Chunyan. Crystal pagoda stood at the center of the fragment, and a beautiful figure sat cross-legged within the pagoda. This woman had a pink oval face, and she was wearing a leather jacket with a peeper front with dark flowers and golden twigs and leaves. She had glossy black hair, and her hair was tied up in a unique gourd bun. She wore a pair of pearl-encrusted boots, and she seemed extremely gorgeous. If one looked at her up close, she wasn't devastatingly beautiful. However, if one looked closely, one would notice that she was extremely pleasing to the eye, and the more one looked at her, the more comfortable one would feel. This was because her entire body was filled with a serene aura. Even a single glance at her could completely calm one's restless heart. This was an extremely unique aura. At this moment, a middle-aged man slowly walked out from the shadows behind her. He silently gazed at her back, and after pondering for a moment, he said, "Chenyang, Yuan Hongwen intends to personally come to the market this time. Apparently, he brought an ancient spiritual pill, and he specifically wants to trade with you." The woman slowly opened her eyes. Her eyes were filled with a deep blue that seemed like the surface of a lake. They flickered with a dim light, and they gave off a strange feeling. "Father, I understand. Since it's an ancient spiritual pill, then I'll carry out the trade with Yuan Hongwen." Ji Chenyang spoke calmly. The middle-aged man's eyes flickered, and he said in a low voice, "Yuan Hongwen is probably using this trade to get close to you. Chenyang, if you don't want to see Yuan Hongwen, then there's no need to force yourself." Ji Chenyan's beautiful eyes were calm. She turned around and gazed at the middle-aged man, and she said, "Father, I'm not forcing myself this time. It's just that the ancient spiritual pill is indeed useful to me. I'll only talk about the trade with Yuan Hongwen this time, and nothing else." After she finished speaking, Ji Chenyang seemed to have sensed something, and she raised her beautiful eyes to look outside the window. After that, her expression changed slightly, and she said in a low voice, "Someone is breaking through the restrictions of the market." As she spoke, Ji Chenyang stomped her foot, and she vanished on the spot like an agile butterfly. On the other hand, the middle-aged man's gaze was like a torch, and he vanished from the pagoda as well. Crack! Countless cracks began to appear in the sky above the fragment, as if the sky above the fragment had split open. It was an extremely terrifying sight. Many Earth immortals in the market had their pupils contracted. Of course, there were also many half-immortals who had relied on their connections to enter the market. They all looked at this scene with fear. The barrier of the market had been cast down by a heavenly Saint Master and over a dozen profound Saint Masters of the Eternal Clan. It was unimaginably tough. The young man's right hand moved like lightning, and he quickly tapped the surface of the restriction. Every time he tapped, the restriction would shake violently, and the cracks on the surface of the restriction would become even denser. Translation is translation. Is translation. Is translation? Translation. Is of. Which bastard locked this fiend outside and didn't let him in? F***ck. Which bastard is guarding the door? He doesn't even know Zhuowen. Did his brain get squeezed by a door? There was no lack of Earth immortals in the market. After seeing the indifferent young man, they immediately recognized him. This was Zhuowen. Back then, he had even dared to snatch the items belonging to the Lord of Extreme Yin. Not to mention, he also had the backing of a true immortal. In the end, even the Lord of Extreme Yin was forced to leave the matter unsettled. This was something that everyone knew about a month ago. Now that Zhuowen had broken the restrictions, there was no doubt that he was blocked outside. Otherwise, he wouldn't have deliberately destroyed the peace of the market. Of course, even more people were extremely shocked in their hearts. They never imagined that Zhuowen actually knew how to break through formations and was actually able to break through the restrictions of the market to such an extent. It was truly shocking, and it caused many people to feel even more fearful of Zhuowen. If it was said that they were afraid of Zhuowen because of Shiji, then now, all these people had changed their minds and started to be afraid of Zhuowen himself. At this moment, the man in charge of the entrance of the market was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. He knew that things had really gotten out of hand. Zhuowen had caused such a huge disturbance in the restrictions. He couldn't escape the blame. "You lunatic. This is the market. How dare you break the restrictions? You're finished. Our everlasting family will definitely not forgive you. Why don't you stop now and kneel on the ground to beg for mercy?" The man's voice was filled with fear. He still tried to use the everlasting family to pressure Zhuowen. However, Zhuowen laughed. He said coldly, "I'm not the one who's stubborn. It's you. If you didn't let me in, would I break the restrictions? Would I mobilize so many people? Now you still want to threaten me? Fine, I don't care about this restriction." As he spoke, Zhuowen revealed a ghastly smile, and then the fingers on his right hand changed abruptly as he tapped repeatedly on the surface of the restriction. Instantly, the might of the devouring curse restriction was displayed to the limit by Zhuowen. Bang! 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 Then, continuous explosive sounds came from the surface of the restriction. Then, the entire restriction began to collapse. In the end, it shattered into countless pieces. Zhuowen slowly entered the entrance of the celestial market under countless shocked gazes. He was like a god or a demon in the midst of countless collapsed fragments. This guy. The way he entered the market is really domineering. Among the stunned warriors, someone couldn't help but murmur softly. His eyes were filled with fear. You're too bold." The man guarding the door was so angry that he was trembling. His eyes were red. Like a beast that had lost its mind, he suddenly pounced at Zhuowen. He knew that he couldn't absolve himself from the blame for the restriction being broken. He was afraid that he would be punished by his family. Thinking of the terrible consequences of the punishment, He shuddered. At the thought of the terrible consequences, this person was filled with monstrous hatred for Zhuowen. Zhuowen looked indifferently at the man who was rushing straight at him. He tapped the 5 fingers of his right hand. Countless runes swept out from the void and instantly wrapped around the man. Then, the man was directly imprisoned in the air, unable to move. I have no intention of making an enemy out of your everlasting family, but you've gone too far. This celestial market is a gathering for trade. Since there's a need, anyone has the right to enter and trade. It's not like you, discriminating against weaker cultivators, Zhuowen said indifferently. The man kept struggling. Unfortunately, the power of the devouring curse restriction was extremely strong. The more he struggled, the tighter the devouring curse restriction became. It was accompanied by the sound of bones cracking all over his body, as if many of the bones in his body were crushed. Whoosh whoosh. Suddenly, 2 sounds of breaking through the air came. A beautiful figure and a middle-aged man came over side by side. Although the woman wasn't extremely beautiful, the tranquil temperament she exuded made Zhuowen's eyes light up. Moreover, the middle-aged man standing beside the woman had an extremely strong aura. He was at least at the peak of the earthly immortal realm. It's Ji Chenyang. I didn't expect Ji Chenyang of the eternal family to be drawn out. Shuehui and old man Zhu rushed to Zhuowen's side. The 2 of them stared at Ji Chenyang with shining eyes. Their eyes were filled with infatuation. Although Ji Chenyang's beauty was slightly inferior to Mu Chenshua's, her temperament was extremely unique. It was this temperament that added a different charm to Ji Chenyang. She's Ji Chenyang? Zhuowen looked at Ji Chenyang from head to toe, but did not speak. Ji Chenyang first looked at the gatekeeper who was imprisoned by the devouring curse restriction. Then, her beautiful eyes fell on Zhuowen. You're Zhuowen, who's been famous recently, right? I don't know why Brother Zhuo is so violent to barge into the celestial market. Can you give me an explanation? Ji Chenyang's voice was very pleasant to the ears. It was clear and melodious like an oriole, making people feel relaxed and happy. I'll have to ask the gatekeeper of your celestial market about this. This person purposely made things difficult for us. He didn't allow us to enter the celestial market and even said that my cultivation is low. If I want to enter the celestial market, I'll have to pay 1,000 immortal crystals. Could it be that your celestial market really stipulates that warriors below the earthly immortal realm have to pay 1,000 immortal crystals to enter the celestial market? Zhuowen said indifferently. Young Miss Chen Yang, Lord Patriarch, you can't listen to this person's nonsense. This lowly one didn't make things difficult for him at all. He was clearly the one who made things difficult for me. Young Miss, Patriarch, you have to uphold justice for me. The middle-aged man did not say a word. He walked to the gatekeeper and waved his sleeve. Instantly, the devouring curse restriction on the gatekeeper was released. This action made Zhuowen's eyes narrow dangerously. However, the gatekeeper's next action made Zhuowen's eyes narrow. Slap. 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 The middle-aged man did not hesitate to give the gatekeeper a few slaps. The sound of slaps rang out continuously. The gatekeeper's cheeks swelled up and he spat out blood mixed with broken teeth. He looked dispirited and listless. Are you blind? The person before you is Zhuowen. You actually refused to let such a person into the celestial market, and even sacrificed the restrictions of the celestial market because of this. You really are a good gatekeeper, the middle-aged man said in a low, muffled voice. After saying that, the middle-aged man pulled the gatekeeper to Zhuowen. He said to Zhuowen with great care, little friend Zhuowen, you can do whatever you want with this person. Even if you kill him, the immortal family will not have any complaints. The gatekeeper was stunned. Only now did he come back to his senses. Especially when the middle-aged man handed him over to Zhuowen, he realized that he had offended someone he should not have offended. At this moment, the gatekeeper was filled with regret. The instant the middle-aged man dragged him in front of Zhuowen, he hurriedly knelt on the ground and repeatedly kowtowed to Zhuowen. Lord Zhuo, this lowly one has eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. Please forgive this lowly one this time. Bang, bang, bang. Chapter 1764. Zhu Yizhuowen's gaze passed by the man that guarded the entrance and descended onto the middle-aged man by his side, and then he cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Patriarch Ji, all of this is a misunderstanding. Since the misunderstanding has been resolved, I ought to be able to enter the market now, right?" Xue Hui had already introduced the middle-aged man before him via voice transmission. He was the patriarch of the Eternal Clan, Ji Liuyun, whereas the young woman that possessed a unique and tranquil bearing by the middle-aged man's side was the extremely renowned Ji Chenyang. Ji Liuyun's attitude had obviously given Zhuowen sufficient face, so Zhuowen couldn't go too far. After all, as the number one power amongst the 9 great divine talisman clans, the Eternal Clan's resources and reserves were extremely deep, so Zhuowen naturally knew how to stop while he was ahead. Ji Liuyun smiled in a carefree manner. Soon after, he took out a piece of white jade from his sleeve and handed it over to Zhuowen. "Little friend Zhuo, it's our Eternal Life Clan's fault this time. This white jade is worth 10,000 spiritual crystals in the celestial market. Little friend, you can completely use this white jade to purchase what you need in the celestial market." Zhuowen revealed a surprised expression. This Ji Liuyun is really generous. 10,000 immortal crystals isn't a small amount, and to most earthly immortals, this might be most of their wealth. But Ji Liuyun didn't even frown as he passed it to Zhuowen. Under the envious gazes of Xue Hui, Old Man Zhu, and the other earthly immortal realm experts, Zhuowen received the white jade and cupped his fists to Ji Liuyun. "Thank you, Patriarch Ji. I'll accept your offer." The smile on the corners of Ji Liuyun's mouth grew even more brilliant when he saw Zhuowen accept the white jade, and then he looked at the man that guarded the entrance and grunted coldly. "Fuck off. You don't have to come to the market again in the future. Besides that, the Eternal Clan can't tolerate a big shot like you. Men, take him away." The corners of the man's mouth were covered in bitterness as he was taken away by 2 robust men. It wasn't difficult for everyone to imagine that this person would probably be expelled from the Eternal Clan, and his situation was obvious. At the instant the man was taken away, another old man in a long robe flashed out from the depths of the market. This old man's gaze was sharp like an eagle, and it emanated a glow that was difficult to look at. Whoosh! The old man's speed was extremely fast. In an instant, he arrived at the entrance of the celestial market. His entire body was filled with an extremely vast amount of celestial energy. "Heaven Saint Master?" Zhuowen's eyes narrowed as he softly murmured. "Patriarch. Just now, when I came out of seclusion in the celestial market, I discovered that the 9 revolutions great array around the celestial market had been broken. Who was so daring to destroy the 9 revolutions great array of the celestial market?" "Hey!" The old man's gaze was extremely unfriendly. However, when he arrived at the entrance, his gaze immediately landed on the broken restrictions. The more he looked, the more interested he became. He said in a deep voice, "It wasn't broken by brute force, but by a strange method. Who is the one who broke the formation?" When the old man rushed over, Ji Liuyun and Ji Chenyang did not dare to be negligent. Ji Liuyun nodded at him, then pointed at Zhuowen and said with a bitter smile, "This formation was broken by this little friend Zhuowen. However, this is a misunderstanding. I hope Mr. Zhuowen will not take offense, and also not blame little friend Zhuowen." Zhu Yi looked at Zhuowen from head to toe. His gaze was slightly blazing as he said, "Just now, I looked at the surrounding traces of the broken formation. This method of breaking the formation is not simple. At least, this old man has never seen it before. Is it an ancient restriction?" Zhuowen's eyes narrowed slightly. This old man called Zhu Yi was not simple at all. He was actually able to deduce that Zhuowen had used an ancient restriction technique just by looking at the situation of breaking the formation. This caused a trace of admiration to rise in Zhuowen's heart. Moreover, looking at this old man's gaze, there was no other meaning other than a hint of fanaticism. This old man should be someone who was extremely obsessed with restrictions. Otherwise, he would not reveal such a fanatical expression. Zhuowen remained silent and only nodded slightly. The old man's eyes lit up and he laughed. He came in front of Zhuowen with great enthusiasm and said with a smile, "Little friend Zhuowen, can you come to this old man's humble home for a chat? Don't worry, this old man will not be disloyal. Moreover, with your current background, this old man does not dare to touch you. Zhuowen pondered for a moment, then finally nodded slightly and said, sure. Haha, little friend, you're really straightforward. Since you've agreed, we'll take our leave first. The old man laughed and nodded at Ji Liuyun and Ji Chenyang. Then, he brought Zhuowen deep into the celestial market. Looking at the two people leaving, Ji Liuyun and Ji Chenyang revealed a helpless expression. Zhu Yi was the only heaven saint master in their everlasting family. Moreover, this Zhu Yi was not simple. It was said that he was only half a step away from becoming a celestial saint master. Logically speaking, such a powerful existence at the peak of heaven saint master should have been invited by the primal chaos temple to become a member of the upper echelon. However, Zhu Yi did not. The reason was that Zhu Yi was indebted to the ancestor of the everlasting family. Moreover, in Zhu Yi's early years, Zhu Yi had helped him a lot. In order to repay this debt, Zhu Yi stayed in the everlasting family. Of course, with Zhu Yi's strength and status, the everlasting family basically treated him as an important guest. Even the patriarch, Ji Liuyun, and the genius, Ji Chenyang, were polite to him. After all, it was already a great fortune for the everlasting family that he stayed in. Xue Hui and old man Zhu smiled bitterly at each other. They did not expect this to happen. However, the two of them had Zhuowen's contact information, so they decided to take a stroll in the celestial market. When Zhuowen came out, he would contact the two of them immediately. The fragment was extremely large, and the celestial market only took up 1/10 of it. Apart from a boundless desert, there was nothing else. This was an extremely high cliff. At the top of the cliff, a waterfall cascaded down, landing on the boulders below and producing the clear sound of water flowing. Not far from the waterfall stood an extremely elegant wooden loft. A streak of light shot over and two figures appeared. One of them, an old man, pointed at the wooden pavilion and smiled. Zhuowen, this is where I live. Do as you please. With that, the old man waved his hand and the wooden pavilion immediately began to ripple. Clearly, a powerful restriction had been placed around the pavilion. Ancient forbidden wind formation? Zhuowen's eyes narrowed as a wisp of surprise appeared on his face. He had never expected that the surroundings of the wooden pavilion before him would actually be a type of ancient restriction. Moreover, this ancient restriction was not weak at all. Looks like you've really done some research on ancient restrictions. Come into my humble abode and rest for a while. The old man revealed an expression of admiration when he saw Zhuowen swiftly recognize the ancient restriction outside the pavilion, and he acknowledged Zhuowen even more. After the two of them entered the pavilion, there were two children with their hair tied up in buns. They set up 2 tables and poured 2 pots of tea on top of the tables. After the two of them sat down, the old man said with a smile, "Young friend Zhuowen, I'm Zhu Yi. I hope you don't mind that I took the liberty of inviting you to my humble abode." Zhuowen waved his hand and said, "Senior, you're worrying too much. Senior's abode is elegant, quiet, and tranquil. I'm afraid others would only wish for it. How could they possibly mind?" Zhu Yi roared with laughter. After he took a few sips of tea, he gazed at Zhuowen and pondered deeply for a moment before he said, "Young friend, based on the method you used to deal with the surroundings, I can discern that you've probably inherited some extremely powerful ancient restriction technique, right? I wonder if you can tell me the name of that ancient restriction?" "Young friend, please don't misunderstand. I'm just too obsessed with ancient restrictions, so I took the liberty to ask." "It's fine if you don't want to tell me," Zhu Yi hurriedly said. Zhuowen's eyes flickered, but he smiled. "It's actually not a big deal. My ancient restriction is called the Devouring Curse Restriction. I wonder if Senior has heard of it before?" Zhu Yi's eyes lit up as he said in surprise, "The Devouring Curse Restriction, one of the 10 great ancient restrictions? Young friend, you really are quite lucky to have inherited such a powerful ancient restriction. If you can cultivate this ancient restriction to greater mastery, you'll probably be able to easily defeat a heavenly saint master with the Devouring Curse Restriction even if you haven't broken through to the heavenly saint realm." Zhuowen did not reply. He stared at Zhu Yi quietly. He knew that Zhu Yi had called him over for something important, so he just waited for Juyi to start the conversation. Juyi's eyes flickered. He gritted his teeth and said, "Zhuowen, you know that I'm extremely obsessed with ancient restrictions, or perhaps I should say that I've reached the point of insanity. Your devouring curse restriction is very important to me, so I'm willing to pay any price to obtain the method to cultivate it from you." Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He continued to stare at Juyi quietly. He knew that since Juyi had said something like that, the item he wanted to exchange for was probably extremely valuable. "Young friend, do you recognize this item?" After a moment of hesitation, Juyi pulled out a purple leaf from his sleeve. The purple leaf seemed very similar to a newborn baby. Its eyes were closed, and it was extremely lifelike. A violet infant leaf. Zhuowen suddenly stood up. He stared at the purple leaf in a daze, but his heart was thumping wildly. The violet infant leaf was an item of legend. It was said that there were only 7 leaves in the world. It was born at dawn, where yin and yang intersected. Of course, the intersection of yin and yang was extremely rare. Even if one encountered it, its location was not fixed. It was said that the moment the violet infant leaf was born, it would only exist for 5 breaths of time. If it was not plucked within these 5 breaths of time, the violet infant leaf would vanish and cease to exist. It could be said that the violet infant leaf was very rare. What was even rarer was that the violet infant leaf itself contained the runes of the world where yin and yang intersected. If a cultivator absorbed the violet infant leaf, they would be able to achieve a balance between yin and yang, rapidly increasing their celestial core power. The leaf was extremely beneficial to celestial saint cultivators, especially those who were about to break through their shackles. I know that young friend's cultivation has already reached the half-immortal realm. If you have the violet infant leaf, you can completely break through to the earthly immortal realm in a short period of time. Is it possible to exchange the violet infant leaf for the devouring curse prohibition? Juyi probed. Zhuowen took a deep breath. Perhaps Juyi did not know that Zhuowen still had the yin and yang qi that he had obtained from the master of Tai-yin. If he had the violet infant leaf, Zhuowen could completely absorb the yin and yang qi, allowing him to advance to a higher realm. There was no doubt that the violet infant leaf was extremely beneficial to Zhuowen. However, Zhuowen did not lose his mind because of this. He knew very well that the devouring curse prohibition was one of the top 10 ancient prohibitions. It was even more precious than the violet infant leaf. Chapter 1765. The exquisite restriction. Although the violet infant leaf was extremely precious, there was still a huge gap between it and the devouring curse restriction. In Zhuowen's opinion, the violet infant leaf was not enough to trade for the devouring curse restriction. Juyi also knew that there was a gap between the violet infant leaf and the devouring curse restriction, so his eyes flickered as he took out a bamboo slip that was several feet long from his sleeve. The bamboo slip was rusty and slightly damaged. With Zhuowen's eyesight, he could naturally see that there was definitely an extremely powerful restriction on the bamboo slip when it was complete. However, for some reason, the restriction around the bamboo slip had already been damaged. Even the bamboo slip was damaged to such an extent. "This is?" Zhuowen asked curiously. Juyi's eyes flickered as he said, "This bamboo slip records the exquisite restriction. The exquisite restriction, one of the 10 great ancient restrictions of the ancient times. This is an ancient restriction that ranks even higher than the devouring curse restriction. It's extremely powerful. You actually possess such an ancient restriction?" Zhuowen was shocked, but he soon revealed a strange expression. He stared at Juyi and frowned. The exquisite restriction was even more precious and powerful than the devouring curse restriction. Generally speaking, it would not be traded away so easily. However, Juyi had taken it out to trade. It was truly a little strange. Juyi also sensed Zhuowen's strange gaze. He smiled bitterly and said, "Little friend Zhuowen, this is indeed the exquisite restriction. However, the core of the exquisite restriction is incomplete, so it's impossible to cultivate. It can only be used as a reference. I've had this incomplete version of the exquisite restriction for countless years. Although I'm unable to cultivate it, through comprehending this incomplete version, My mental energy has risen rapidly. In the end, due to comprehending this ancient restriction, I was able to cultivate immortal force with my mental energy, breaking through to the profound saint realm and reaching the peak of the heavenly saint realm. Ju Yi sighed softly. I've reached a bottleneck now. I know that without a complete ancient restriction, it's impossible for me to break through to the celestial saint realm. However, you've given me hope. If I can cultivate the devouring curse restriction, I might be able to break through my current bottleneck. A look of understanding flashed across Zhuowen's eyes. No wonder Ju Yi was willing to take out the exquisite restriction so easily. It turned out that the exquisite restriction was incomplete. Zhuowen's eyes flickered as he continued, the exquisite seal is too badly damaged. Even with the addition of the violet infant leaf, it still cannot compare to the complete devouring curse seal. Ju Yi nodded. He was not too surprised. He took out a yellow crystal from his sleeve again and passed it to Zhuowen. I can see that you're also a profound Saint Master, so you must be confused about how to break through to the heavenly Saint Master level. This crystal contains all of my cultivation experience. Zhuowen's eyes lit up as he received the yellow crystal from Ju Yi. His mind entered the crystal and casually browsed through it. His eyes grew brighter and brighter. The yellow crystal was basically filled with Zhuowen's countless years of experience in cultivating mental force. It also contained an extremely detailed explanation of how to advance from profound saint to heavenly saint master. It was extremely valuable to Zhuowen, and it could be said to be a priceless treasure. This kind of experience would be extremely beneficial to him in breaking through to the heavenly saint master level. Zhuowen took a deep breath as hesitation appeared in his eyes. Ju Yi, on the other hand, was not in a hurry. He sat quietly in front of Zhuowen, his eyes burning like torches as he waited for Zhuowen's reply. Thump. A fish suddenly leapt out of the small pond outside the window before falling into the water with a plop, causing countless ripples. Zhuowen slowly raised his head and smiled. I'll accept this deal. Ju Yi smiled, and it was an extremely hearty laugh. He heavily patted Zhuowen's shoulder and said, Thank you, little Zhuowen. This deal is just far too important to me. Thank you for agreeing. Ju Yi was just too excited. His snow-white hair stood on end as his entire body trembled. Zhuowen waved his hand and said, Senior, there's no need to be like this. This is a fair deal. With that, Zhuowen flicked his finger and took out a jade slip from his spirit ring. Shortly after, his right hand pointed at the jade slip as if he was drawing something. After about half an incense stick's worth of time, Zhuowen stopped drawing the jade slip. He let out a sigh and handed the jade slip to Ju Yi. This jade slip contains the cultivation method of the devouring curse. Senior, you can check it and see if there are any flaws in it. Ju Yi took the jade slip and seriously checked it. He laughed. There's basically no problem. Thank you, little Zhuowen. After the two finished the deal, they put away their items. Afterward, the two of them sat in the pavilion and talked about their views and cultivation methods of immortal force. As they continued to talk, Zhuowen's admiration for Ju Yi grew. This Ju Yi was indeed very knowledgeable. He had read both ancient and modern times, and his knowledge was extremely rich. Especially when it came to cultivation methods of immortal force, he gave his own unique views. Immortal force was a new energy formed from the combination of yuan force and mental force. Only by combining immortal force could one become a profound Saint Master. However, Ju Yi himself did not cultivate the martial way. He used the restriction method that he knew to absorb yuan qi and convert it into yuan force before combining it with mental force to create immortal force. This was how he successfully became a profound Saint Master and climbed to the Heaven Saint Master level. Without a doubt, Ju Yi was definitely a genius to be able to come up with such a method. This method was definitely a blessing for Arcana Masters who specialized in mental force. After all, cultivating mental force was already extremely difficult. If one still had to spend time on the martial way, the efficiency of cultivation would definitely be greatly reduced. However, if one followed Ju Yi's method to cultivate one's mental strength, the efficiency and speed would be much faster. Zhuowen was rather impressed by such an alternative method. As the discussion continued, Zhuowen found that he had benefited a lot. All the doubts he had regarding mental force were suddenly cleared up during the discussion. Zhu Yi had indeed put in a lot of effort. Because Zhuowen had brought him too many benefits this time, he could be said to have taught Zhuowen everything he knew during the discussion. This celestial market will last for 10 days. Today is the second day. Little friend Zhuowen, you can stroll around in the celestial market. Who knows, you might even find a treasure that you like. However, the real good things in this celestial market are actually in the crystal pagoda that little girl, Ji Chenyang, is in. Little friend, you can go there and take a look, Zhu Yi said meaningfully after the discussion ended. Zhuowen was startled. He slowly stood up and cupped his hands. Thank you for your reminder, senior. If I have any doubts about mental force in the future, I will definitely come to you again. I will take my leave now. Haha, this place is open to you at any time. No matter when you come, I will always welcome you, Zhu Yi said with a hearty laugh. Zhuowen cupped his hands together and left the place. After Zhuowen left, Zhu Yi gave some instructions to the two boys in the pavilion. Soon after, he hurriedly took the jade strip that Zhuowen had given him and entered the interior of the pavilion, intending to enter into a retreat. The celestial market was shrouded in fog and filled with people. It was like a fairyland. Before Zhuowen entered the celestial market, he notified Xuehui and Old Man Zhu in advance. The two of them were already waiting outside the celestial market. Sorry for the long wait. I was delayed by Senior Zhu Yi for a while. I hope you don't mind, Zhuowen said apologetically. Xuehui and Old Man Zhu waved their hands and said that they didn't dare. With Zhuowen's current strength and status, how could they dare to blame Zhuowen? The three of them chatted for a while and then entered the celestial market. The celestial market was indeed huge. There were many stalls inside, and the owners of the stalls were at least in the early stage of the Earth Immortal realm. In fact, according to the distribution of the number of people, most of the people in the celestial market were at the half-immortal realm. There were only a few people at the Earth Immortal realm and above. Even so, there were nearly 100 of them. According to the rules of the celestial market, half-immortals could enter the celestial market. Although they had to pay celestial crystals, it only cost 10 celestial crystals to enter. This was why so many half-immortals entered the celestial market. At that time, Zhuowen was purely unlucky. The gatekeeper was not in a good mood at that time. Coincidentally, Zhuowen bumped into him, so he deliberately made things difficult for Zhuowen. However, he didn't expect to kick an iron plate like Zhuowen. In the end, he was expelled from the family. Zhuowen casually checked the many stalls in the surroundings. However, he did not discover any treasures that interested him. Instead, Xuehui and Old Man Zhu saw treasures that they liked in the stalls along the way. After a round of bargaining with the stall owner, the two of them bought the treasures that they liked. Brother Zhuo, are you not satisfied with the treasures in these stalls? Xuehui saw that Zhuowen had no intention of making a move, so he couldn't help but ask. Zhuowen shook his head. Soon after, he looked at the crystal tower in the center of the celestial market and said, "Why don't we go in and take a look? Maybe we can find something good there." That's the transaction tower set up by the organizer, Eternal Life Family. It is said that if you want to enter, you have to have 50,000 celestial crystals. Old Man Zhu Shong said awkwardly. Xuehui also showed the same expression. They were only in the early stage of the Earth Immortal realm. At most, they had around 10,000 celestial crystals. Without 50,000 celestial crystals, they didn't have the qualifications to enter. Zhuowen frowned. Soon after, he said to the two of them, "Those who have the qualifications to enter can bring others in, right? The two of you just have to come with me." Xuehui and Old Man Zhu Shong looked at each other. They never thought that Zhuowen would actually go in. Although they knew that Zhuowen had the white jade that Ji Liuyun had given him, which was worth 10,000 celestial crystals, there was still a difference of 40,000 celestial crystals. That was not a small amount. They were rather doubtful that Zhuowen could take out so many celestial crystals all of a sudden. However, Xuehui recalled the scene of Zhuowen using celestial crystals to use celestial techniques when they fought. He felt slightly relieved. He knew that Zhuowen probably had quite a lot of celestial crystals on him. Zhuowen ignored the worry on Xuehui and Old Man Zhushong's faces and directly walked towards the crystal tower. Xuehui and Old Man Zhushong could only follow behind Zhuowen. Chapter 1766. Divine sense attack. A mere half-celestial shouldn't block the way. You're just a hindrance. A cold voice suddenly came from behind, causing Zhuowen to squint. He turned around and saw a group of people walking over. The group was led by two people. One of them was a middle-aged man with a gloomy expression. Zhuowen wasn't unfamiliar with this middle-aged man. He was He Yu, who had some conflicts with Zhuowen when he first entered the Primal Chaos Divine Temple. The other man was quite young. His hair was messy, and there was a strange blood mark drawn on his face. His eyes were cold and indifferent. He did not say a word. He only glanced indifferently at Zhuowen before turning his head away, losing interest. Zhuowen glanced at the messy-haired man again. He could feel that the messy-haired man's aura was even stronger than He Yu's. Moreover, from He Yu's attitude, it could be seen that He Yu was quite afraid of the messy-haired man. The owner of that ambiguous voice was none other than He Yu. The group quickly arrived at the entrance of the crystal tower. He Yu glanced at Zhuowen provocatively, then took out 50,000 celestial crystals from his spirit ring to prove his qualification. He arrogantly walked into the tower. Then, the messy-haired man and his group entered the tower. Xuehui and the old man frowned when they completely entered the tower. Xuehui said in a deep voice, "Sir, you should know that He Yu. He's the head of the Wang Ren family. The messy-haired man is also an expert from the blood sacrifice family, one of the 9 saint talisman families. His name is Kong Haogan. His cultivation is above He Yu's. He's an extremely difficult opponent." Zhuowen nodded when he heard that. Then, he expressionlessly took out 50,000 celestial crystals from his spirit ring and led Xuehui and the old man into the crystal tower. The interior of the crystal tower was extremely large. Inside, there was a display of transparent crystal counters. Through the counters, Zhuowen could see all kinds of treasures. There were spiritual herbs with strong spiritual energy, medicinal pills with strong medicinal efficacy, weapons that sparkled with fluorescent light, and so on. The moment Zhuowen entered the tower, he took a light sniff and a faint fragrance assailed his nostrils. This fragrance made him feel relaxed and happy. Turning his head, Zhuowen saw a beautiful woman standing there quietly. Her beautiful eyes were smiling as she looked at Zhuowen. Her smile was filled with a different kind of tranquility. "Misty." Zhuowen cupped his fists at the woman and said indifferently. Ji Chenyang looked at Zhuowen from head to toe and whispered, "Master Zhuyi holds you in high regard. He even told me that if young Master Zhuo comes to the crystal tower this time, I must treat you well." Zhuowen smiled but didn't reply. He knew that Zhuyi must have his reasons for reminding him to come to the crystal tower. Now that Ji Chenyang had come to greet him, there must be something else in the crystal tower. "Young Master Zhuo, please follow me. This time, there will be a secret auction on the 3rd floor of the crystal tower. Those who can participate in this secret auction must be at least at the late Earth Immortal Realm. However, since Master Zhuyi specifically told me to, I will make an exception and allow young Master Zhuo to participate as well," Ji Chenyang said casually. Zhuowen smiled lightly and said, "Looks like it's really all thanks to Senior Zhuyi this time." Ji Chenyang nodded and said, "Young Master Zhuo, please follow me. If no one leads you to the 3rd floor, you won't be able to enter." With that, Ji Chenyang led the way while Zhuowen, Xuehui, and the old man slowly followed behind. It was a long and winding staircase. Along the way, Zhuowen could clearly feel that he was being spied on. It was as if someone was secretly watching the people walking on the staircase. However, this feeling of being spied on disappeared like smoke in thin air after Ji Chenyang let out a cold snort. Zhuowen knew that the Eternal Life family's spies were probably everywhere in the darkness around the stairs. If any cultivator who didn't know his place barged into the staircase, he would immediately be attacked by the experts hidden in the dark. They walked up the stairs and soon arrived at the 3rd floor. The third floor was extremely spacious and was a building within a building. The third floor was divided into 2 levels. One of the levels had a high platform in front of it and behind it was a bright red curtain. Seeing this, Zhuowen immediately knew that the high platform in front of him was used for the auction. On the second floor, there were many private rooms. These private rooms were embedded at the edge, and the private rooms were arranged in a circle. At this moment, most of these private rooms had their curtains drawn. Through the curtains, Zhuowen could see many people moving about. Obviously, these private rooms with curtains drawn were all taken. And the strange thing was that these boxes were surrounded by quite powerful restrictions. If ordinary divine sense wanted to probe the situation inside, it would basically be blocked outside. When Ji Chenyang led Zhuowen and the other 2 to the third floor, the people in the private rooms seemed to have sensed something. Immediately, numerous divine senses swept over like a gale and landed on Zhuowen and the other 2. Then, the owners of these divine senses revealed a look of surprise. Among the 3 people who were brought up, 2 of them were only in the early stage of the Earth Immortal realm and the other was only in the Half-Immortal realm. With such cultivation, they were actually invited to the third floor. This made the people in the private rooms reveal strange expressions. Of course, this astonishment only lasted for a short while before the owners of these divine senses withdrew their divine senses. Although many people found it inconceivable that Ji Chenyang had invited a half-immortal without permission, that was all. They didn't take it to heart and only thought that the half-immortal might have gotten in through the back door. When the divine senses were retracted, suddenly, one of them did not retreat. Instead, it charged directly towards Zhuowen. Its speed was beyond everyone's expectations. The moment this divine sense swept over, Zhuowen's eyes were piercingly cold. He could feel the surging killing intent on this divine sense. It was obvious that this divine sense was targeting him. Impudent. Ji Chenyan's beautiful eyes turned cold. She did not expect such a thing to happen. In this private room, there was actually someone who dared to fight on the third floor. Even if it was a divine sense, it was still against the rules set by the everlasting family. Ji Chenyang snorted coldly. Her jade-like hand touched her forehead. Immediately, the surging divine sense from her forehead turned into a green vine, entangling the incoming divine sense. Ji Chenyang was after all a peerless genius of the younger generation in the Central Plains. She was an existence comparable to the divine child, Yuan Hongwen. The vine formed from her divine sense was extremely powerful. In an instant, it entangled the powerful divine sense. Who is it? How dare you fight in the auction held by the everlasting family? Ji Chenyang said coldly. However, she was met with silence. Just as Ji Chenyang was about to speak again, her beautiful face changed drastically. She saw that the divine sense entangled by her divine sense had transformed into a divine sense blade shadow. Once this divine sense blade shadow was formed, its power was raised to the extreme. Immediately, it split the vine apart. Its speed increased sharply, and it went straight for Zhuowen's forehead. Ji Chenyang snorted and could not help but take a few steps back. When she wanted to stop it again, it was already too late. The divine sense blade shadow had already swept over to Zhuowen. It was almost within reach. Be careful. Ji Chenyang only had time to warn Zhuowen. At this moment, Zhuowen's eyes were extremely cold. In this divine sense, he felt a familiar aura. This aura was extremely similar to that of He Yu. However, this divine sense blade shadow was much more powerful than the divine sense used by He Yu. This was not a divine sense used by an earthly immortal. Only a heavenly immortal could use such a terrifying divine sense. Has the Wang Ren family become so shameless to this extent? They actually let a heavenly immortal use his divine sense to deal with a half-immortal like me? Zhuowen muttered in his heart. The divine senses in the surrounding boxes that were originally retracted stopped one after another. They looked at the scene below with great interest. Most of these divine senses were filled with gloating. Although the divine sense blade shadow was powerful, it was not enough to kill a half-immortal. However, it was more than enough to destroy a half-immortal's sea of consciousness. It was more than enough to make a half-immortal a cripple. Without a doubt, the intention of the owner of this divine sense blade shadow was extremely sinister. It was obvious that he wanted to cripple Zhuowen. This kid is really unlucky to be targeted by a heavenly immortal. This time, even if he doesn't die, he will become a cripple. Zhuowen stared at the divine sense blade shadow that swept over him. Then, he retreated step by step. This divine sense blade shadow gave him too much pressure. Moreover, this was an attack that targeted divine sense. It was useless for him to use other magic treasures. He could only use his divine sense to resist. Damn it! When Zhuowen was forced to the edge, Zhuowen clenched his teeth. His eyes revealed a trace of coldness. Just as he was about to use his divine sense to resist, the mysterious eyeball that was hiding in his arms suddenly moved. Then, the mysterious eyeball suddenly blinked. Immediately, a black lightning bolt suddenly swept out. Crackle! The moment the black lightning swept out, it emitted a crackling sound. Its speed was extremely fast. In an instant, it blasted on the divine sense blade shadow. Then, the blade shadow was directly covered by the black lightning. Bang! 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 A series of muffled sounds rang out. The divine sense blade shadow did not last long under the black lightning. It collapsed with a loud bang. Moreover, the moment the black lightning blasted the divine sense blade shadow, it continued to move forward. It followed the trajectory of the divine sense blade shadow and swept out. In an instant, it swept into a box in the northeast corner. Boom! 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 The moment black lightning entered the private room, a commotion could be heard from the private room. Among the commotion, there was even a furious shout from someone. Crack! Chapter 1767. He Wushang. When the two figures appeared outside the room, Zhuowen's eyes suddenly narrowed. Not far away, Ji Chenyan's beautiful eyes also darkened. She said in a low voice, He Wushang. At this moment, He was in an extremely sorry state as he fell to the ground. His eyes were filled with shock. He didn't expect the black lightning to be so terrifying. If He Wushang hadn't tried his best to protect him in the box, he would have been entangled by the black lightning. Even if he didn't die, he would have been seriously injured. Why does this kid have such terrifying black lightning on his body? Could it be that his true celestial master left it for him to protect himself? Yes, that must be it. He's just a half-celestial master. It's impossible for him to have such powerful means, He thought. On the other hand, He Wushang's eyes were gloomy. He coldly stared at the shattered box. A black bolt of lightning suddenly shot out from the shattered box. It was so fast that it exceeded He Wushang's imagination. Damn it! What kind of power is this? He Wushang couldn't help but curse in a low voice as he looked at the black lightning. He rolled up his sleeve and a terrifying aura burst out from his body. Then, he grabbed at the void with his right hand. Sword. As soon as these words came out, countless densely packed sword shadows erupted from his right hand. As soon as these sword shadows appeared, they began to sweep out, transforming into a terrifying sword shadow vortex. Like the mouth of a giant beast, it swallowed the black lightning in a single gulp. Crackle. Unfortunately, a strange crackling sound was emitted when the sword shadow whirlpool swallowed the black lightning. Soon after, the sword shadow whirlpool collapsed with a bang amidst this muffled sound. He Wushang's eyes narrowed. The speed at which the sword shadow vortex collapsed was too fast, and the black lightning's attack was too fierce. All of this was beyond his expectations. Therefore, when the sword shadow vortex collapsed, He Wushang had no choice but to retreat step by step. He grabbed at the void with his left hand and said in a deep voice, Saber. At this moment, surging celestial core power gathered in his left hand. Then, countless terrifying saber shadows burst out. As soon as these saber shadows were formed, they overlapped and turned into a huge saber shadow. The blade shadow possessed a terrifying might that could split the world apart. It swung down with a swoosh as soon as it was formed. Wherever the blade shadow passed, ripples would appear. As the ripples spread, the surrounding space suddenly collapsed, forming many strange spatial cracks. Rumble. The speed of the saber shadow was extremely fast and it instantly blasted onto the black lightning. The power of the saber shadow was even greater than the sword shadow vortex. The terrifying aura that could split the heavens and earth caused the surrounding people to tremble in fear. Fortunately, there were extremely powerful restrictions around the third floor. He Wushang was also wary of the ancestor behind the Eternal Life clan, so he did not unleash his full strength. He only dealt with the black lightning, hoping to weaken the black lightning step by step. Although the saber shadow was powerful, it was still shattered by the black lightning. However, after coming into contact with the saber shadow and sword shadow, the lightning on the surface of the black lightning became much dimmer. He Wushang's eyes were burning. Then, he stepped into the void with his right foot. Instantly, even more terrifying celestial core power began to gather under his feet, forming an extremely sharp and terrifying spear shadow. Swoosh! As soon as the spear shadow formed, it shot out like an arrow and instantly blasted in front of the black lightning. Then, He Wushang used his celestial core power to create all kinds of strange weapon shadows. Finally, he destroyed the black lightning completely with the smallest price. He Wushang's gaze towards Zhuo-Wen also became slightly solemn and wary. Of course, He Wushang was not wary of Zhuo-Wen, but of the black lightning that burst out of Zhuo-Wen's body. He Wushang naturally knew about Zhuo-Wen's background. Behind him was the famous fighting Buddha demon saint. In He Wushang's opinion, as long as he could immediately cripple Zhuo-Wen, Shiji would casually fall out with him at the crucial moment when the primordial battlefield was about to open. After all, Zhuo-Wen was only a half-immortal. Compared to a half-immortal in the primordial battlefield, He Wushang knew that Shiji was a person who understood the big picture and would not find trouble with him over such a small matter. But now, He Wushang knew that he was wrong. The black lightning was obviously not Zhuo-Wen's own technique. The only possibility was that the black lightning was given to Zhuo-Wen by Shiji. To be able to give such a powerful technique to a half-immortal junior, it could be seen how much importance Shiji attached to Zhuo-Wen. This made He Wushang feel a little incredulous. While He Wushang was deep in thought, Ji Chenyang had already swept in front of Zhuo-Wen. She stared at He Wushang with her beautiful eyes and said in a deep voice, "Senior He, you attacked my guest without restraint in the auction set up by the Eternity family. Do you not take the Eternity family seriously at all? If that's the case, I can only ask our family's ancestor to come and judge for us." Hearing this, He Wushang's pupils shrank. He hurriedly smiled and said, "Niece Ji, this is all a misunderstanding. I heard that the minimum requirement for the third floor of the Crystal Tower should be late-stage earthly immortal to be qualified to enter and participate in this auction. However, the auras of the three fellows you brought with you are simply too weak." Putting aside the two early-stage earthly immortal trash beside them, there is actually a half-immortal ant among them. This puzzles me. Thus, I guess that the three of them are hiding their cultivation bases. Even I am unable to see through their true cultivation bases. Because of that, this old man felt an itch in my heart and decided to test you. This time around, this old man has made a mistake. I apologize to Niece Ji. Ji Chenyang frowned and shook her head. "Senior He, the person you should apologize to is young Master Zhuo, not me." He Wushang smiled faintly. He only glanced at Zhuo-Wen and didn't move. Obviously, he didn't plan to apologize to Zhuo-Wen. He even seemed to be ignoring Zhuo-Wen. Zhuo-Wen glanced at He Wushang indifferently and said coldly, "Bullying the weak with your strength, yet you can still make it sound so dignified. Your Wang Ren clan skin is so thick and shameless. I, Zhuo-Wen, really admire you." As soon as these mocking words left his mouth, He Wushang immediately turned his head and stared at Zhuo-Wen with an unfriendly gaze. He said in a deep voice, "Little guy, you can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. The strange black lightning on your body is indeed powerful, but how many times can it be used? If I want to kill you, it will be as easy as crushing an ant. If it wasn't for Shiji's sake, do you think you would have been able to defeat me just now?" Zhuo-Wen no longer paid any attention to He Wushang. Instead, he looked at Ji Chenyang and said, "Miss Ji, please arrange a private room for the three of us. I don't want to waste my breath on a mad dog." The moment these words were spoken, the entire place became silent, and He Wushang was so angry that his face flushed red. However, due to the fact that they couldn't fight here and the strange and unpredictable black lightning on Zhuowen's body, He Wushang finally let out a cold snort and walked into another room with He Yu. Young Master Zhuo, I'm really sorry. I didn't know that this would happen. If this has caused you any trouble, our immortal clan is willing to compensate you for any losses, Ji Chenyang said apologetically. In her territory, Zhuowen was almost crippled because of an attack. If this matter were to spread, it wouldn't benefit the immortal clan at all. However, Zhuowen waved his hand and signaled Ji Chenyang to bring them to the private room. Ji Chenyang wasn't a sloppy person. After bringing them to the private room, she said, "Young Master Zhuo, the auction will be held in 3 days. As it's a secret, you can't go out during this period. You can only stay here until the auction starts." Hearing that, Zhuowen nodded and didn't have any objections. Ji Chenyang smiled sweetly and left the private room. The Wang Ren clan has gone too far this time. That He Yu is already bullying the weak when dealing with Brother Zhuo. Now, even their clan's old ancestor, He Wushang, is dealing with Brother Zhuo. They are really shameless. Old Man Zhu was filled with righteous indignation. Xue Hui also nodded in agreement. Zhuowen was only a half-immortal. It was already unfair for an Earth immortal to deal with him. However, the Wang Ren clan was even better. Even their heavenly immortal old ancestor was involved. This was simply a shameless act. Zhuowen waved his hand and said, "Let's not talk about this. After the War of Gods begins, I will let the Wang Ren clan know the consequences of messing with me, Zhuowen." After saying that, Zhuowen revealed a cold smile. When Xue Hui and Old Man Zhu Shong saw the cold smile on Zhuowen's face, they couldn't help but shiver. The two of them couldn't help but think of Feng Ruji, who died in Zhuowen's hands. Feng Ruji's cultivation and strength were actually similar to He Yu. Even if he was slightly weaker than He Yu due to the Saint Talisman, it was still limited. Since Zhuowen could kill an expert like Feng Ruji, it shouldn't be a problem for him to kill He Yu. Zhuowen slowly turned his head. Just as he was about to look outside the window through the curtains, his expression suddenly changed. It was as if he had encountered something extremely shocking. Xue Hui and Old Man Zhu Shong naturally noticed the sudden change in Zhuowen's expression. They quickly asked, "Brother Zhuo, what happened to you? Are you feeling unwell?" Zhuowen's eyes flickered. He said in a deep voice, "Maybe the battle just now affected me a little. I have some minor injuries on my body, so I need to recuperate for a while." Xue Hui and Old Man Zhu Shong nodded. They didn't doubt Zhuowen's words. Under Zhuowen's instructions, they assumed the role of protectors. Chapter 1768. 10 Laws. The 19th mountain of the Azure Dragon Hall stood proudly above the ocean. Giant waves over 10,000 zhong tall rose from the surface of the ocean and sprang toward the shore of the 19th mountain like furious dragons, resulting in terrifying splashes of water. At this moment, a golden figure was walking over from the depths of the 19th mountain. He was extremely fast, crossing thousands of meters with a single step. In an instant, he had reached the shore. Splash! At this moment, the moment this figure came to the shore, the wild laughing waves on the surface of the sea seemed to have gone crazy. They actually set off extremely terrifying waves. Then, with a rumbling sound, they came crashing down from the sky and heavily smashed onto the 19th mountain, instantly submerging the golden figure on the shore. "Ha ha! Break!" The golden figure was arrogant. He clenched his right fist and twisted his waist. His right fist was thrown out along with his waist, slamming heavily on the incoming wave. Bang! 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 Golden light exploded the moment this fist was unleashed. Soon after, the huge wave that was surging over collapsed with a loud bang, causing countless tiny splashes to fly out. The punch was like the sky was falling and the earth was splitting. The sun and moon lost their light. Just the punch alone was enough to make the surging waves go around the 19th mountain and rush to the other side. Senior First Mountain God, I have completely comprehended the fourth forbidden area's law of the Azure Sea. Are you still not going to show yourself? The golden figure stood on a reef on the shore of the 19th mountain and roared at the sky. His voice was so loud that it was like thousands of thunderbolts, echoing in the entire third heaven. Whoosh! Not long after the voice was heard, a long rainbow shot over from the horizon and arrived above the 19th mountain in an instant. This figure was tall and slender, and he wore a pitch-black robe. A black veil fluttered around his face, making it difficult to see his true appearance. Of course, one could still see the scars on this person's face through the veil. This person was none other than the mysterious first mountain god. The first mountain god glanced at the golden silhouette with admiration. He said in a low voice, "Not bad. To be able to comprehend the fourth forbidden area's precept so quickly, you have exceeded my expectations. You have just comprehended the law of the Azure Sea. In addition to the 9 laws in your body, you now have 10 laws. In other words, you have the qualifications to touch Tao will." Whoosh! As soon as the first mountain god finished speaking, another figure flew over. This figure stopped beside the golden figure, revealing a robust figure in a black robe. This figure was Zhuowen's body, who had just entered the Azure Dragon Hall. Can I really touch Tao? Will I be able to touch Tao will after comprehending 10 laws? The first mountain god's god asked. The first mountain god nodded. Tao will. The first mountain god's law of mountain god. This is the simplest Tao will. Will. Is will Tao will God. Will Tao. Zhuowen nodded. 10 types of laws were too many. To a saint, it was extremely rare to be able to comprehend 10 types of laws. Even Daoist Kang Long had only comprehended 6 types of laws all those years ago. However, Zhuowen knew that the reason he was able to gather all 10 types of laws was, in a sense, due to luck. Moreover, the Azure Dragon Taoist's 6 laws contained the mysterious law of time. This law was not easy to comprehend. Just the law of time alone could surpass most of the other laws. Moreover, this was not the only way to comprehend Tao will. There were other ways, but Zhuowen did not know about them. Now, you can try to comprehend Tao will. If you, who have comprehended 10 laws, are still unable to comprehend Tao will, then it can only be said that you are not fated to comprehend Tao will, the first mountain god said with his hands behind his back. Zhuowen nodded and sat cross-legged on the reef. His great success holy body clone also merged with the first mountain god's body. Boom! A muffled sound suddenly resounded from Zhuowen's body. Then, an extremely powerful law power began to spread around Zhuowen. Numerous laws emerged from Zhuowen's body and floated above Zhuowen's head. There were a total of 10 laws, and they burst out with 10 different colors. The 10 laws were fire, ice, karma, demonic slaughter, explosion step, void, death, desolation, ocean, and so on. As soon as the 10 laws appeared, they began to revolve above Zhuowen's head, forming a wheel of light. As the light wheel continued to spin, an invisible ripple began to spread in all directions. The ripple spread at an extremely fast speed and instantly covered the entire third world. Bang! 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 Wherever the ripples passed, the surface of the vast sea began to erupt with extremely terrifying huge water pillars that reached the heavens and the earth. And the countless white clouds in the sky, under the influence of the ripples, actually formed wave after wave, looking extremely strange and strange. At that moment, the sky and the earth seemed to be still under the influence of the ripple. It was as if time and space were eternally frozen at that moment. The first mountain god squinted his eyes. Naturally, he could feel the effect of the ripples around him. Even he was almost affected by the power of the ripples. Fortunately, his strength was so great that he was able to block the ripples outside of his body. Zhuowen quietly sat cross-legged on the reef. He was quiet and peaceful. The light wheel above his head spun faster and faster, becoming more and more terrifying. As the light wheel spun faster and faster, the surrounding ripples also became denser and denser. Moreover, the ripple broke through the sky. Then, a terrifying sound of an explosion came from the sky. Countless cracks began to appear in the area covered by the sky. It was as if the sky could shatter at any time. Oh no, we can't let this power rush out of the third heaven. Otherwise, It will definitely cause a huge commotion in the outside world. The first mountain god's face changed slightly. He immediately formed a seal with his right hand. Suddenly, an extremely vast and terrifying giant mountain appeared behind him. This mountain seemed to be connected to the sky and the earth. It was even more majestic than the 19th mountain. This mountain was the first mountain that the first mountain god lived in all year round. The other 17 mountain gods form the 18 mountain god formation. The first mountain god roared. His voice spread throughout the entire sky. Then, the other 17 mountain gods who were affected by the ripple woke up one after another. Their gazes turned serious as they followed the first mountain god and formed seals with their hands. Rise, form the formation now. The first mountain god lifted the first mountain with his right hand and threw it into the sky. The first mountain suddenly shot up into the sky. The other 17 mountain gods followed the first mountain god's example and threw their own mountains into the sky. Then, at the end of the sky, they surrounded the first mountain. At the top of the mountain, terrifying flames violently erupted. The flames that were spewed out by the 18 mountains at the same time were too terrifying. They densely covered the entire sky of the third heaven as if they were endless flames that burned the heavens. The moment the burning heavens flame rushed out, it immediately blocked the invisible ripples that were about to break through the sky. After doing all this, the first mountain god let out a sigh of relief. Then, he looked at Zhuowen, who was sitting cross-legged on the reef below with a serious expression. At this moment, the speed of the light wheel above Zhuowen's head reached its limit. Then, with a whoosh, it suddenly shot up into the sky and heavily slammed into the surface of the flames. Then, countless sparks flew out. The first mountain god's gaze was gloomy. He took a step forward and instantly flew into the sky. He stopped in front of the light wheel that shot up into the sky. Then, 9 golden runes appeared on his body. The 9 runes began to stack on the first mountain god's right fist. Then, he suddenly punched out. The 9 runes were like a whirlwind as they revolved around the first mountain god's arm. Bang! 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 The sound of glass shattering could be heard. On the first mountain god's right arm, a blazing golden light appeared. Then, he frowned slightly and involuntarily retreated. The power of the light wheel was extraordinary. Its high-speed rotation produced a terrifying force that formed a terrifying hurricane in the surrounding space, forcing the first mountain god to continuously retreat. Damn it! Break for me! The first mountain god's pupils shrank to the size of needles. Then, the 9 golden runes that revolved around his right arm exploded. Then, a terrifying force that could even change the color of heaven and earth appeared on his right fist. Rumble. The first mountain god punched out again. As soon as he punched out, a terrifying fist wind swept out. Immediately, the surrounding flames were directly overturned. With the first mountain god as the center, a vacuum area of hundreds of thousands of miles was formed. Just the fist wind alone was able to produce such a terrifying force. It could be seen how terrifying the first mountain god's fist was. Bang! 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 When the fist finally landed on the light wheel, an invisible shockwave began to spread out and swept out in all directions. It was as if the surrounding space was going to be smashed and shattered. The first mountain god's pupils shrank. He let out a muffled groan and retreated a few hundred steps. The light wheel was also sent flying by the first mountain god's fist. However, the moment the light wheel stabilized itself, it did not continue to soar into the sky. Instead, it began to squirm as if something was trying to break out of the light wheel. Bang! A muffled sound could be heard. Then, as the light wheel squirmed, it directly formed a huge arched door. The arched door stood in the void. Its surface was bursting with colorful lights. It looked extremely mighty and extraordinary. Chapter 1769. The door of profundity. This arched door looked illusory, but upon closer inspection, it was incomparably solid, giving one an extremely strange feeling. Tao may be Tao, but it is not the eternal Tao. Name may be a name, but it is not the eternal name. Nameless, the beginning of all things. Name, the mother of all things. Therefore, there are no desires, to observe its wonders. There are always desires, to observe its actions. The two come from the same place, but their names are the same. They are the most mysterious of mysteries, the door of profundity. The moment the arched door appeared, an illusory and dreamlike voice slowly came from within the door. It was as if an old scholar who had read many books was holding a yellowed book and slowly reciting from the other side of the door. The first mountain god silently looked at the arched door that appeared. His eyes revealed an indescribable depth. Then, his gaze fell on Zhuowen. At that moment, Zhuowen had already stood up. His gaze was filled with bewilderment. Tao may be Tao, but it is not the eternal Tao. Name may be a name, but it is not the eternal name, Zhuowen softly muttered. However, the confusion in his eyes became even more intense. He slowly raised his head and saw the arched door that was suspended in the air. The moment he saw the arched door, there was nothing else in his line of sight. There was only the illusory arched door. At this moment, the voice that sounded like an old scholar reciting from the arched door continued to spread out. It was as if the other side of the door could really be the mansion of a knowledgeable old scholar. The moment Zhuowen saw the arched door, clarity and confusion rapidly alternated in his eyes. His eyes revealed a look of struggle. The first mountain god silently looked at Zhuowen. It was as if he was waiting for Zhuowen to make his next choice. Perhaps, after entering the other side of the door, I will be able to completely comprehend the concept and power that is constantly lingering in my mind. This should be the Tao intent that the first mountain god and Xiao He talked about, right? Zhuowen's gaze fell on the arched door. The look of struggle had already disappeared. It was replaced by a look of desire and anticipation. Tao insight, muttering in a low voice, Zhuowen stepped into the air, step by step, and walked towards the arched door. The moment Zhuowen lifted his right foot and stepped towards the arched door in the air, disappointment appeared in the first mountain god's eyes. He said, "And here I thought this kid was different from the rest. Who would have thought he couldn't resist the temptation of the door of profundity? Should we stop it?" At this point, the first mountain god's eyes flickered. He frowned and stared at Zhuowen, who was walking towards the arched door. He was considering whether or not to stop Zhuowen. He'd only heard of the door of profundity. Supposedly, this door was mysterious and unfathomable, and no one knew where the other end of the door led to. But he knew that all the peerless geniuses that entered this door had practically never come out. The first mountain god's origins were extraordinary, and he was from the ancient times. During that era, there were monstrous geniuses that had comprehended Tao insight. He'd seen the door of profundity a few times, and all those monstrous geniuses that had comprehended Tao insight had chosen to enter the door of profundity. The final outcome was that these monstrous geniuses that entered the door of profundity never appeared again. Even though the first mountain god hadn't entered the door of profundity and couldn't rashly make a judgment, he knew that no matter what sort of world was on the other side of the door of profundity, once one entered it, one could practically dream of leaving. As for whether one was able to comprehend Tao insight after entering it, that was even more illusory. At this moment, Zhuowen was already extremely close to the door of profundity. According to Zhuowen's current speed, he only needed 10 breaths of time to completely step into the door of profundity. Alas, I can't allow this kid to enter the door of profundity just like this. There are still 2 great laws of the 6 great forbidden areas that require this kid to comprehend. I can only stop him. The first mountain god let out a soft sigh. Shortly after, his right foot stepped into the air as he prepared to make a move to stop Zhuowen, who was walking towards the door of profundity. However, the instant the first mountain god stepped out with his right foot, his entire body froze as his gaze suddenly locked onto Zhuowen's figure. He saw Zhuowen, who was still a distance away from the door of profundity, suddenly stop as a struggling expression appeared on Zhuowen's face. There's a chance, this kid is actually struggling. The first mountain god's eyes revealed a glow as he stopped moving. His bright eyes stared at Zhuowen, who had a struggling expression on his face. At this moment, Zhuowen was in a daze as he stared at the door of profundity in front of him. In his mind, he thought of Mu Chunxue and the ancient method that could save Mu Chunxue. If I enter the other side of the door, what will happen to Chen Shui? Will there be a method to save Chen Shui there? No, I can't gamble. Even if there's a method to save Chen Shui on the other side of the door, I can't gamble. I need absolute certainty. Since the Primal Chaos Temple has a method to save Chen Shui, then I won't leave this place. Even if I have to give up the chance to comprehend the Tao intent, I won't leave this place. Zhuowen's eyes revealed a gentle expression. It was as if he could see Mu Chunxue slowly awakening under the ancient treatment. Moreover, she would stand up and throw herself into his embrace. Moreover, she would say to him, "Long time no see, I miss you very much." At this moment, Zhuowen's eyes revealed an unprecedented clarity. He indifferently stared at the door of profundity that was emitting an endless temptation as he slowly retreated. Whoosh! However, the instant Zhuowen retreated, the door of profundity suddenly shook and a dazzling white light shot out. It transformed into a giant palm that shot towards Zhuowen as fast as lightning, wanting to pull Zhuowen completely into the door of profundity. The instant the giant hand appeared, Zhuowen's pupils constricted into needles. Although he was extremely puzzled as to why such a giant hand would appear in the door of profundity, he knew that this giant hand didn't come with good intentions. It should be planning to forcefully pull him into the world behind the door. Therefore, Zhuowen didn't even think as his right foot stepped into the air and he explosively retreated. At the same time, he unfolded his lightning wings and his speed soared to the limit. However, although Zhuowen's speed was fast, the giant hand that appeared was even faster. It was as fast as lightning as it instantly swept in front of Zhuowen. A gale whistled as it blew up Zhuowen's shoulder-length hair and clothes. Looking at the giant hand that was getting closer and closer, Zhuowen's heart thumped wildly as his face turned pale. He could feel the terrifying aura coming from the giant hand. This aura was too terrifying and vast, making him feel as if he was facing a supreme mountain. At this moment, in front of the giant hand, Zhuowen truly felt how small he was. It was as if the giant hand could crush him and crush his life at any time. The instant the giant hand swept in front of Zhuowen, the first mountain god had also arrived. The first mountain god clenched his right hand and suddenly punched out. During the process of punching out, countless fist winds whistled and actually formed an extremely large black dragon. Under this punch, several hundred black dragon fist winds were formed. Shortly after, the first mountain god shouted in a low voice, "100 dragons crushing fists." Bang! 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 When the punch landed on the giant hand, the black dragon that was formed by the fist winds began to explode one by one. The terrifying explosive power formed by the exploding black dragon spread out and shattered the surrounding space. The power of each black dragon's explosion was comparable to the all-out attack of the Wang Ren clan's ancestor, He Wushang. The power formed by the explosion of such a terrifying number of black dragons was too terrifying. It was enough to kill any celestial immortal. However, such a terrifying punch only caused the giant hand to pause for a moment before it completely collapsed. However, the light on the surface of the giant hand became much dimmer. Zhuowen, retreat first. The first mountain god's face was extremely solemn. His entire body erupted with an unimaginable amount of blood qi. The surface of his body was no longer emitting a golden light like the Great Completion Saint physique. Instead, it was a dark golden color. At this moment, the first mountain god was like a god that had descended to the mortal world. The incomparably vast aura that erupted from his body was extremely terrifying. Zhuowen could only look up in awe and respect. Fist of the Reincarnation. The first mountain god took a deep breath. He slowly clenched his right hand and threw out another punch. When the punch was thrown out, tens of thousands of fist shadows appeared in the void. These fist shadows formed a cycle in the void. It was like the cycle of life and death. They formed a circuit and turned into a huge reincarnation plate that blocked the giant hand. Bang! 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 The giant hand swept over and slammed into the reincarnation plate. Endless explosions rang out. Then, the space that formed the third heaven began to be densely packed with cracks. These cracks were not just a part of the third heaven. Instead, they spread across the entire third heaven. No matter where one was in the third heaven, One could see that the surroundings were filled with spatial cracks. Is the third heaven going to be shattered? This is too terrifying. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with shock. He could not help but retreat. In the end, he landed on the shore of the 19th mountain, where he had been meditating with his eyes closed. The instant Zhuowen landed on the shore, the giant hand that was originally filled with an imposing aura suddenly retracted. Then, it slowly shrank back into the door of profundity. Furthermore, the door of profundity collapsed and turned into countless fine powder. These fine powder were like a gust of wind that whistled down. In the end, they all drilled into Zhuowen's forehead. At this moment, the first mountain god lightly sighed. He waved his sleeve and kept the reincarnation plate. He did not expect that the giant hand would be retracted just like that. Looks like the operation of the door of profundity is related to this kid's position. If this kid did not take a step forward, he might not have caused a backlash from the door of profundity. Now that this kid has returned, the door of profundity has also returned to its original state. The first mountain god looked at Zhuowen, who was not far away, and revealed a look of understanding. At that moment, Zhuowen revealed an even more bewildered expression. He didn't expect that the originally overbearing huge hand would suddenly stop attacking, and the mysterious door of profundity had even turned into powder and rushed into the space between his eyebrows. Chapter 1770. Half-step Tao intent. As the chanting continued, a look of understanding slowly appeared in his eyes. Looks like the true Tao insight isn't actually within the door of profundity, but on the door of profundity. If your heart doesn't move, then even the door of profundity will be helpless. In the end, it will shatter with the passage of time, transforming into strands of Tao insight that enter your body. Those monstrous geniuses of the past were all wrong. The first mountain god landed in front of Zhuowen and stared at Zhuowen with a complicated gaze. Even he didn't expect that the door of profundity would end up like this. The real thing was in the door of profundity. Zhuowen, have you comprehended Tao intent? The first mountain god looked at Zhuowen and asked. Zhuowen shook his head instead. This door of profundity does indeed contain a trace of Tao insight, but it's only temporarily within my body. If I want to obtain the Tao insight, I still need to slowly comprehend it. The first mountain god nodded and said in a deep voice, then you should first comprehend the Tao intent stored in your body. This trace of Tao intent was obtained at the cost of shattering the 10 laws. You have to cherish it well. Zhuowen nodded. Even if the first mountain god didn't remind him, he knew how precious this Tao intent was. If he didn't grasp it well, then wouldn't the 10 laws be wasted? Moreover, Zhuowen discovered that the trace of Tao intent actually contained the Tao intent of the 10 laws at the same time. Moreover, it was superior to the 10 laws. If he could comprehend this trace of Tao intent, it would be absolutely beneficial to him. Regardless of whether it was in terms of attack or speed, he would definitely be much faster than before. It just so happens that I can borrow the flow of time in the Azure Dragon Hall to comprehend this trace of Tao intent in my body. In the outside world, Zhuowen still had to wait for 3 days before the auction would begin. However, in the Azure Dragon Hall, it would take 3 whole years. These 3 years were enough for Zhuowen to comprehend Tao intent. Senior First Mountain God, I have comprehended the law of the 4th forbidden area. I don't need any other rewards from you, but you must help me upgrade my great success sacred body clone to a perfect sacred body. After Zhuowen made up his mind, he looked at the first mountain god and spoke in a deep voice as he separated the clone of his holy body. The first mountain god's eyes flickered. In the end, he nodded and said, I can promise you this. You just have to give me the saint body. Once you have completely comprehended the path meaning, I will return the saint body to you. With that, the first mountain god waved his sleeve and put the saint body into his sleeve. Then, he leaped up and turned into a rainbow as he left the place. On the other hand, Zhuowen stood silently on the 19th mountain for a long time, and then he sat cross-legged on a rock on the shore before he started to calm his mind and concentrate, and he silently comprehended the trace of Tao insight within his sea of consciousness. Time passed slowly. Although the flow of time in the Azure Dragon Hall had no effect on Zhuowen's cultivation, Zhuowen wasn't cultivating in the Azure Dragon Hall this time. Instead, he was comprehending the trace of Tao insight formed by the door of profundity. Tao insight was illusory and had no tracks to follow. However, Zhuowen didn't need to create something out of nothing. Instead, he could directly comprehend the trace of Tao insight within his sea of consciousness. This kind of comprehension was much easier than Zhuowen comprehending it on his own. Of course, this kind of ease was only relative. When it was the third day in the outside world, Zhuowen, who was sitting cross-legged on a rock in the third world of the Azure Dragon Hall, suddenly opened his eyes. At this moment, his eyes were exceptionally bright. It was as if the evolution of the sun, the moon, and the stars could be seen in his eyes, as well as the evolution of a century of reincarnation. Tao insights are divided into a total of 9 levels, and each level is higher than the previous. Every single level is capable of increasing one's overall strength by a corresponding amount. Zhuowen muttered in a low voice as he revealed an expression of understanding. During this period of time in the Azure Dragon Hall, he'd finally completely comprehended that trace of Tao insight, and after he completely comprehended that trace of Tao insight, he finally knew that Tao insights were far more profound than he'd imagined. Possessing Tao insight allowed his body's constitution, reaction ability, the might of his immortal arts, and even the might of the Tempest Saint Talisman and Iceflame Saint Talisman to obtain a comprehensive increase. It was even to the extent that the weapons in Zhuowen's possession were able to obtain a corresponding increase. Amongst them, the first level of Tao insight was able to increase one's strength and might by 2 times, whereas, the peak of the 9th level of Tao insight was instead able to increase one's strength and might by 9 times. This was an extremely terrifying characteristic of Tao insights. Now, after Zhuowen completely comprehended the Tao insight formed from the door of profundity, he found out the rough direction of Tao insights, whereas, his current Tao insight was at the half-step Tao insight and hadn't attained the first level of Tao insight. As its name implied, half-step Tao insight was a Tao insight that Zhuowen hadn't completely comprehended and hadn't attained the first level of Tao insight, so it was only capable of increasing one's overall strength by roughly half. Even though it was only half-step Tao insight, it was absolutely a milestone in Zhuowen's opinion. As the saying goes, everything is difficult at the beginning, but once something has been started, then the following things would become a matter of course. Presently, Zhuowen had merely comprehended half-step Tao insight, yet he'd already stepped into the domain of Tao insights. If he wanted to advance a step further and cultivate the first level of Tao insight, then it would instead be much easier than comprehending Tao insights. Of course, if Zhuowen's fortune wasn't bad in the future, then perhaps the Tao insight in his body would undergo a great transformation, and it was even possible for it to attain the 2nd level of Tao insight or even the highest level of Tao insight, the 9th level of Tao insight. But Tao insight was an illusory thing after all, and being able to comprehend it was already an extremely joyous matter. As for whether it was able to advance a step further, it could only depend on Zhuowen's fortuitous encounters in the future. At this moment, Zhuowen slowly stood on the reef, and his right hand slowly stretched out horizontally before abruptly flipping over. Strands of strange ripples appeared on the center of his right palm. These ripples slowly extended throughout Zhuowen's entire body, and then Zhuowen felt the strength in his entire body instantly rise explosively by almost 50% at this moment, and the increase in his strength wasn't just a little bit. Moreover, this increase in strength wasn't just a one-sided increase in strength, but an overall increase in strength. This was much more terrifying and formidable than ordinary secret techniques that could increase one's celestial energy and aura. This Tao insight is indeed illusory. It's actually able to silently increase the strength in my entire body. If I were to suddenly use this Tao insight during a battle, then it would absolutely achieve an unexpected effect. Zhuowen had his hands behind his back as he stood on the reef, and his gaze pierced through the void and descended onto the surging sea in front of him. He seemed calm, but his heart was filled with excitement and excitement. Whoosh! At the same time, a ray of light shot over explosively from the horizon and instantly stopped in the air above Zhuowen, revealing a stalwart figure that wore a black robe and had a blurry face. It was the first mountain god. The first mountain god faintly glanced at Zhuowen and revealed a rare look of admiration as he said, "Not bad. Although it's only a half-step Tao insight, you can be considered to have stepped into the threshold of Tao insight. If you have the opportunity in the future, you might be able to take a step further and reach the first level of Tao insight. Zhuowen nodded and immediately asked in a deep voice, Senior First Mountain God, did you bring my complete saint body clone? The First Mountain God faintly smiled and said, Of course, I brought it. As he spoke, the First Mountain God waved his sleeve, and suddenly, a golden figure was thrown out and landed in front of Zhuowen. The golden figure in front of him had an appearance that was no different from Zhuowen's. His upper body was bare, and his expression was as cold as a demon's. Zhuowen sized up the saint body in front of him and found that the golden light on the surface of the latter's body was much more restrained than before. Moreover, it was faintly transforming into a dark gold color. In particular, the aura that was faintly emitted from its body made Zhuowen squint his eyes and feel a sense of danger. Now that your saint body clone has reached the small completion realm, its strength is comparable to the later stage of the Earth Immortal realm. However, its physical body is so hard that even a peak Earth Immortal realm expert would find it difficult to break it. After the small completion, it is the great completion and perfect completion. These two realms correspond to the Sky Immortal realm and Genuine Immortal realm. Chi refining warriors, the First Mountain God faintly said. Zhuowen nodded. With a wave of his sleeve, countless bolts of blood lightning shot out from his spirit ring. Then, a huge blood-colored beast appeared. This blood exotic beast's body was covered with dense bone spikes. It was the Blood Immortal. As soon as the Blood Immortal appeared, she rushed to Zhuowen's side and said with a flattering smile, Master, what's the matter? Zhuowen pointed at the saint body next to him and said, Use your full strength to attack him. The Blood Immortal was stunned, and her eyes suddenly showed a strange expression. She had been with Zhuowen for so long, so she naturally knew about his saint body clone. Now that Zhuowen had asked her to attack his clone, she naturally felt strange and depressed. However, it was Zhuowen's order after all, so she could not disobey. She said in a low voice, Master, then I will offend you. Rumble. As she spoke, the Blood Immortal stepped on the ground with her right foot, and blood thunderbolts burst out from her body. After drawing a bright red trace in the void, she rushed to the front of the saint body. The Blood Immortal bared her teeth and stretched out her right hand. Her fist, which was covered with endless blood thunderbolts, suddenly hit the saint body. However, what surprised her was that the saint body did not move at all, as if he was going to stand there and let her hit him. Boom! With a loud sound, the Blood Immortal's fist hit the saint body's chest directly. Then, the saint body only felt a numbing sensation from his right fist, and could not help but step back dozens of steps. The saint body was expressionless. Although he also stepped back dozens of steps, his chest only caved in, and it was slowly healing. Obviously, this punch did not cause too much damage to the saint body. Master, the Blood Immortal was dumbfounded. Her physical body was already terrifying enough. If she took the punch without moving like the saintly being, she would be even more embarrassed than the saintly being. There was no doubt that the toughness of Zhuowen's saint body clone had almost reached an unimaginable level. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.